Let's go on the record, please. I am Jeff Hughes, a commissioner on the North Carolina Utilities Commission, and with me are Chair Charlotte Mitchell and Commissioners Kimberly W. Duffley, Floyd B. McKissick Jr., Karen Kemerate, William Brawley, and Tommy Tucker. In compliance with the requirements of the State Government Ethics Act, I remind all members of the Commission of their responsibility to avoid conflicts of interest and I inquire whether any member of the Commission has a conflict of interest with respect to this matter before us. Let the record reflect that I have no such conflict and that my fellow commissioners have not identified any such conflict. This technical conference is being held in dockets E-2, sub 931, and E-7, sub 1032. In these dockets, on October 20th, 2020, the Commission issued the order approving revisions to the demand-side management and energy efficiency cost recovery mechanisms, which was the result of the last full review of the Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress mechanisms. On December 30th, 2022, in its order adopting the initial carbon plan in docket number E100, sub 179, the Commission directed Duke to initiate a review of their Commission-approved DSM and EE cost recovery mechanisms. On April 27th, 2023, Duke filed a letter initiating the Commission-directed review of the mechanisms. On October 30th, 2023, the Commission issued the order granting public staff's motion for procedural relief and scheduling a technical conference. The order directed the parties to file comments on a number of issues, set a schedule for filing comments and reply comments, and gave notice of a technical conference. On December 18th, 2023, the Commission held a technical conference, receiving presentations from the parties on the existing mechanisms and on the work carried out as part of the DSM EE mechanism review stakeholder process. On January 26, 2024, initial comments on the mechanisms were filed by Duke, the public staff, the North Carolina Attorney General's Office, the Carolina Industrial Group for Fair Utility Rates 2 and 3, Walmart Incorporated, the Carolina Utilities Customers Association, Inc., and joint comments filed by the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Natural Resources Defense Council, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Sierra Club, North Carolina Justice Center, North Carolina Housing Coalition, and the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, collectively the Efficiency Advocates. On April 1st, 2024, Duke and the public staff filed reply comments. Attached to Duke's reply comments were clean and redline copies of the changes to the existing mechanisms that Duke, together with the Efficiency Advocates, asked the Commission to order. In its reply comments, Duke stated that aside from two contested issues, all parties either agree to or do not oppose the proposed mechanisms attached to its reply comments. On April 5th, 2024, the Commission issued an order scheduling a technical conference to be held today and directed parties to make presentations on several enumerated topics, which brings us to today. The purpose of this technical conference is for the parties to provide information to the Commission on the financial impact of the uncontested issues within the DSM EE mechanisms, on the two contested issues remaining, and on the expected impact of the proposed changes to the mechanisms on non-residential DSM opt-outs. The commissioners will be able to ask questions of the parties, but parties will not be given an opportunity to question each other. The technical conference this afternoon is being transcribed, and the transcript will be filed in the docket as soon as it is available. The parties have provided a proposed agenda for this technical conference, and we will follow that agenda. Before we begin, are there any issues the parties would like to bring to the Commission's attention?
Commissioner Hughes,
Sure.
on behalf of their company, I just wanted to note that Mr. Duff, who is a part of the company's panel, is planning to leave at the conclusion of the company's panel. Of course, after I have questions from commissioners. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, at this time, I would like the parties to identify themselves for the purposes of the record.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. Chair Mitchell, Presiding Commissioner Hughes, LaDon Toon, Associate General Counsel, on behalf of Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, each an LLC. I will also turn it over to Mr. Middleton, who's appearing on behalf of the companies as well.
Hi, I'm Will Middleton with the law firm of Baker Donaldson, appearing on behalf of the companies today. It's a pleasure to appear before you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Ann Keyworth. With me today is Nadia Lohr. We are with the public staff on behalf of the using and consuming public.
Good afternoon, Tyrrell Moore at the North Carolina Attorney General's Office on behalf of the state and its citizens, and I'm joined by Derek Mertz.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. David Neal with the Southern Environmental Law Center, appearing on behalf of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Natural Resources Defense Council, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Sierra Club, North Carolina Justice Center, and North Carolina Housing Coalition. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Presiding Commissioner Hughes and members of the Commission. Christina Kress with the law firm of Bailey and Dixon, appearing on behalf of SIGFR 2 and 3. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Here today on behalf of Walmart, Inc., Carrie Grunman with the law firm of Spillman, Thomas, and Battle.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ethan Blumenthal on behalf of North Carolina, the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association.
Good afternoon, Marcus Tratham at the law firm of Brooks Pierce, here on behalf of CUCA.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for all joining us. I'll now turn the conference over to Duke as the first presenter to provide his presentation.
Thank you. I think the company, in response to the Commission's technical order, did prepare a presentation, which we can go ahead and put on the screen now. Thank you, John. And Mr. Lon Huber, who is at the far end of this table, is going to get the panel started. By this time, I will call Mr. Quinto, Mr. Duff, and Ms. Miller to the witness table. Mr. Huber, when you're finished, if you could pass the clicker over to Mr. Quinto, that would be great.
Will do. I'll do a little shuttle. Yeah. Shuttle pass.
And with that, I'll turn it over to the panel. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, Presiding Commissioner Hughes, Chair Mitchell, and Commissioners. My name is Lon Huber. I lead up Duke's Pricing and Customer Solutions Group. And it's a pleasure to be here before you again today to open up this technical conference. And we come bringing good news. After the last conference, all the parties continued discussions in a very earnest way and had many productive and meaningful sessions, which produced the largely consensus-driven document that's before you today. So, and for your consideration later. So, in terms of an agenda, we have got a variety of topics to cover. I'll hit on the path to consensus, and then subject matter experts will dive into different components of the mechanism and give some examples and respond to some of the questions in the technical order. So let's start with that path to consensus. On the left side, you could view these as inputs, which were mostly hard work, collaboration, and dedication to resolving any type of disagreement and coming up with creative solutions. And on the right side, it's the outputs, which is basically the next evolution of the DSM energy efficiency framework in North Carolina that we believe will benefit our customers and help Duke remain in its leadership role both in the Southeast and the country. So I'd like to maybe start just by taking the opportunity to acknowledge all the hard work and dedication that the parties came together around to work on these issues, particularly public staff, with their noteworthy efforts to really lean in on this. And it was not there was times of disagreement, and there's compromise on all sides. And when I say lean in, I really mean it. There were late night phone calls. There was a bunch of last minute lunch meetings, data going back and forth, and quick phone calls to resolve issues or ask questions. And it showed the party's commitment to the issues in this docket. Again, their commitment to work on these things for the benefits of the company's customers, and fulfill the original directives laid out by this commission. So just wanted to hit on that, and I think the results speak for themselves, where we have a substantial amount of consensus, over 90%, if you look at all the paragraphs and what was agreed upon, and a substantial comprehensive amount of modifications that really evolved this framework to handle the moment of time that we're in, with the high amount of load growth and really the need to do an all the above solution to our energy challenges. So let's look at some of those components of the mechanism that were worked on. You can see a long list here, and there's subcomponents underneath each component. But as I discussed in that first technical conference that we had, the mechanism is a culmination of years worth of work, and it incorporates a variety of viewpoints and expertise from everybody in this room to make that a success. And we use that same formula here for these revisions of working to make sure that we're incorporating all the best ideas, keeping an open mind, and taking a data-driven approach to the modifications that were put in. And we took time to level set, to educate as well, because there's a lot of nuances, and each one of these components, some of them interlock, and so it's important to understand impacts as you change one thing versus the other. And I think one of the most important outcomes of all this work was the consensus, the full consensus for all parties around the 4 enablers. And if you recall, the 4 enablers were key policy items needed to give confidence of the company hitting that 1% of eligible retail sales savings for many, many years to come. And so one of the first items was the updating of the inputs related to the valuation of these customer-sided resources. And this is all about getting a more accurate valuation and making sure there's a level playing field between resources, and also making sure we reflect the changing realities of the grid. So that was important. Then we codified the as-found baseline for energy efficiency measures. So this allows us to be proactive and help customers replace very inefficient, say, HVAC units in a proactive manner, instead of waiting for them to fail. And then the customer's in a moment of crisis, and they might not have the opportunity to purchase the most efficient HVAC to replace it. Next was broadening the definition of low-income customers, and this allows us to be more in sync with these sort of constantly evolving definitions, if you will, and sync up with federal definitions, and this will help with IRA as well. And then finally, developing guidelines for expedited regulatory approval of DSM-E programs. So this is more about, hey, let's test out new technology. If it works, great, we'll get them incorporated into programs. If not, discard. And this dovetails really nicely with the proposed rapid prototyping policy that's also before you. So there's some synergies there. And now you'll see there's 2 red X's there. So there's 2 issues we didn't gain full consensus. There's one party in opposition in each of those categories, and I'll start with the portfolio performance incentive, or what you'll be hearing as PPI. This was an important topic to several parties, and the companies responded to the initial comments of the AGO, of public staff, of the efficiency advocates. And we worked to forge a compromise, and we came up with a tiered incentive approach that is very reasonable, that we think accomplishes the goal of that type of structure. And although we had one party that didn't sign on, I think it's more the thresholds within that structure rather than the structure itself, because again, we were responsive to those initial comments, seeking that tiered performance incentive structure. And then the next one is the active load management proposal by the efficiency advocates. Again, the company saw merit in this, but also saw some suggestions and concerns from other parties. So we attempted to forge a compromise here and come up with a balanced approach to that policy. And fundamentally, what this is about is using customer-sided resources in a broader way, in a more sophisticated way, to take advantage of the latest capabilities and technology. So think battery storage, advanced inverters, smart panels, and try to determine additional value streams, which then turn into customer benefits. And so that's essentially the aim of this. So you could think, well, is there a new type of use case deep in the distribution system that could lead to a non-wires alternative, for instance? And so this is a policy framework that could enable that. And so there'll be an investigation of these value streams, and then if approved, we would come back to the commission, say, hey, this is what we found, and we would like to put forward these additional programs based on our findings. So that is in the proposed mechanism. And then I would say, finally, it's about timing. I think all parties acknowledge that now that we have the structure, we see the clear benefits. Let's try to get these to customers as quickly as possible. And so all parties support a one-time reconciliation process, so we can hit the ground running in 2025. And so we've proposed a 90-day window to update all the programs. And so, as you can imagine, the process of that updating and that timeline will not be an easy task, but it represents the commitment by the companies and by public staff to drive benefits to customers as soon as possible. So expeditious approval of the revised mechanism is critical to the company's ability to implement these changes and get them ready for 2025. And so that's behind the company's request to have approval by the commission by around the end of Q2. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on some of those topics before we turn over to Mr. Duff here to dive into some of the questions from the technical order.
All right, I may have a question, but I want to hear the full picture before it. So any other questions you'll have time again after we get, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. And my name is Tim Duff, and I work in our Customer Solutions Regulatory Enablement Group. And I would be negligent if I didn't echo Mr. Huber's compliments to the parties. This was a lot of work and a lot of real heartfelt discussions on matters that people had to be educated on, and people had to understand each other's positions to find consensus. So I really want to echo his thanks to everybody for all of their hard work in this process. But I'm going to start off, and I'm going to address the specific questions that were posed with respect to the impacts of the new mechanism. And there were 5 questions specifically posed, and I will be addressing the first, the second, and the fourth, and then my colleagues, Mr. Quinto and Ms. Miller, will be addressing the third and the fifth. The first question that was posed pertained to the impact of the measure life adjustment factor on the portfolio performance incentive. But before I get into that analysis, I want to just kind of ground everybody on what the measure life adjustment factor is and why it was incorporated into this consensus mechanism. So every measure within the portfolio of programs that's offered to customers has a measure life, or the amount of time that these energy and capacity savings will be realized from a participant. So our portfolio has measures with 1-year measure lives, and things like heat pumps that have measure lives of up to 18 years. So there's a big difference in the measure lives. While the PPI recognizes the net present value of the full savings of a measure, stakeholders in their initial comments, both public staff and the efficiency advocates, discussed the desire to have more of the portfolio being delivered in terms of energy savings from these long-lived measure lives, meaning it's more predictable that those savings are going to continue to occur. And so we worked with parties to come up with this measure life adjustment factor, which is really a multiplier to the portfolio performance incentive after it's calculated. But essentially what it's designed to do is to motivate the company to increase the weighted average measure life of what's achieved in a particular vintage year. So essentially you've got this multiplier that when we look back at the portfolio and see whether the average measure life of what was delivered, the savings in that year, if that increased or decreased, it could lead to a positive or a negative multiplier on the PPI. And when we developed this, all parties were supportive of this approach and did not oppose it, so it was included in the mechanism. So now I'll get into the calculations here. So when you look at this table, what it's designed to do, and I'm just going to kind of ground people, is it's based off of the projection of vintage 2024 that was made in the DEC 2023 annual DSM rider filing in docket E-7 sub 1285. And what you'll see in that far left tabular is the components of the residential EE revenue requirement, the non-residential, and then the total. As you move to the right of that table, you will see the measure life adjustment factors associated with the different tiers of a measure of a circumstance where you see a decline in the weighted average measure life, meaning that the weighted average measure life goes down or more measures are being realized from shorter lived measures. And so what you'll see is approximately a $100,000 decrease in that first tier, which is a 97.5% multiplier of the PPI. You'll see a $100,000 decrease in the PPI for residential EE and a $300,000 decrease in the non-residential PPI. When you move over to the far right tabular, that is the 95% measure life adjustment factor, which is associated with a 10% decrease in the average or greater in the average measure life. And there it's a doubling of the decrease. So you see a decrease in $200,000 in residential and $600,000 for non-residential. So those dollar values will motivate the company to not want to see a decrease in the weighted average measure life. But to put it into context of the overall EE riders, it's not a significant impact to hit either of those thresholds. If you look at the far right, which is the extreme case, where you're seeing the 95% measure life adjustment factor, you would see a 1,000th of a cent per kWh impact to the residential EE rider and a 3,000th of a cent decrease to the non-residential EE component of the EE rider. So you're looking at very small changes in the actual EE rider rates for both residential and non-residential customers. This next slide will look similar in terms of the impact numbers, but this is the case where you see a measure life increase over time. And again, the tiers here are at 102.5% and 105% instead of that 97 and 95 if you saw a decline. And essentially the increases are the same. For residential EE, you would move up 100,000 at the 102.5% level, $200,000 if you move to the 105% measure life adjustment factor, and then non-residential would be 300,000 and 600,000 respectively. And again, if you look at the numbers at the bottom, they're just the inverse of what you saw before. So the increase, again, I'll look at the far right because it's the extreme case. At the far right, you would see a 1,000th of a cent per kilowatt hour increase in the residential EE rider and a 3,000th of a cent increase in the non-residential EE rider. So again, while the dollars will motivate us, you're not seeing a huge bill impact to the rider rates that would be recovered if you get to these measure life adjustment thresholds. And it's important to note that these aren't automatic. There's reasonable thresholds that have to increase or decrease. So for increases, the first tier is at 10% and the second tier is at 20%. On the decline side, because again, you're moving from status quo, it's a 10% decrease is the furthest tier and a 5% for the closer tier. So it's not 100% symmetrical, but again, it was designed to make sure that there is a stick, if you will, for a declining measure life, but the carrot opportunity, the company has to show more progress to increasing the measure life in order to see that measure life adjustment lead to an increase in the PPI. So I guess I'll ask if there's any questions on the measure life adjustment factor calculations that I can answer before I go on to answer the second question.
Again, I'm going to hold some of my and the staff questions to the very end, but why don't you keep going? But
Okay, great. So the next question that was asked was related to the decreasing of the PRI percentage from 10.6, which is what it currently is in the existing mechanism, to 9.5 in the consensus mechanisms. In case you're not familiar with PRI was something that was added to this most recent mechanism and was designed to kind of eliminate a negative consequence associated with offering non-cost effective programs that are generally targeting income qualified customers. Because they're non-cost effective, that means the program costs exceed the benefits, which would actually reduce the PPI for the company. So at the time of the last mechanism, the PRI was added to the mechanism, which basically was a program return incentive. And it's designed to basically promote the company offering those programs as effectively as possible. And instead of being on the net benefits, the 9.5 or 10.6 under the existing mechanism applies only to the net present value of the system benefits, not the net of costs from the system benefits. So looking at this change, you would see approximately a $48,000 decrease in the PRI amount by moving from 10.6 to 9.5, which is less than 1/1000th of a cent decrease in the EE rider for residential customers. You'll note that there's no impact on non-residential customers, and that's because we don't have any non-cost effective programs targeting income qualified customers in the non-residential suite of programs. So there is no PRI currently or planned at this time for the non-residential space. The final area I'd like to talk about was something that Mr. Huber talked about earlier, and was that fourth question that was asked by the commission pertaining to what the impact of the as-found baseline was in its inclusion in the mechanism. And actually the way the commission asked the question was quite fortuitous, giving us the baseline of the projection of 2024 that was made in the 2023 rider, which is the information you see again in the tabular on the left-hand side. Because of the timing of that filing, the Residential Smart Saver Early Replacement and Retrofit Program, which includes the measurement of an as-found baseline, was not approved. It was not included in that projection. The commission has since approved that program. So for this analysis, we simply layered on what was included in that projection filing for the impacts on the projection of 2024. And again, I'll remind you, this is really about trying to motivate customers to take working equipment and replace it with high efficiency equipment earlier than waiting for it to fail. So it's really trying to drive more savings on the system earlier. And what you'll see is from these numbers that it has a significant impact on the portfolio. Just looking at the residential EE component of the rider, you're looking at over a 1.7% increase in the kilowatt hour savings that are projected just by the addition of this program. Even more importantly, because of the type of equipment that you're talking about replacing early, which is things like insulation, heat pumps, things that have longer lives and are really around heating and cooling load, you see an over 8% increase in the winter KW that would be achieved through the residential portfolio. So it's really driving those kind of savings that we want to see from a utility planning standpoint. Now, in the bottom box, you'll see that the program costs do also go up, and they go up by about 3.99% for residential customers. However, you have to remember that there are higher incentives associated with getting these increased in savings because you're trying to motivate customers to take working equipment, albeit inefficient and limping along, and getting it to move to a higher efficiency standard earlier. So you're having to motivate them to make an investment when they may not otherwise take that investment. So the incentive levels are higher, which leads to that 3.9% increase. So looking at the rider impacts associated with this program, you see about 13 thousandths of a cent per kilowatt hour impact on the residential customer rider. Again, we don't have a non-residential program. While there are some non-residential programs that will occasionally use an as-found baseline in the custom program, generally we're using the efficiency standards and an on-replacement assumption for those programs. However, we believe in the future there will be similar opportunities to try and motivate these early replacements in the non-residential side. And that's really what this consensus mechanism enables. Since the Commission's already approved an as-found program in the past, it really gives us transparency on the fact that anything that would be proposing to use an as-found baseline would have to be clearly identified when it was proposed in front of the Commission, as well as clearly laying out the measurement and verification plan as how those savings and incorporation of an as-found baseline would be utilized. So it really paves the path to continue to try and do this in the residential space, but also expand it into the non-residential space. And the last thing I would say on as-found is it really aligns with another one of the strategic kind of enablers that was envisioned by HB 951 and has been approved by the Commission, which is TOB. We think that an early replacement and retrofit program such as this really aligns with TOB customers because, like I said, not only can you give them incentives that are higher, but now with a TOB type structure, they'll be able to take those upfront investments that they're still going to have to make and be able to make it on a more reasonable time with the tariff on bill repayment approach. So those were the three sections of the questions that I wanted to discuss. But there was section B of the Commission's questions that I just wanted to touch on really quickly from the company's perspective, which was asking what the anticipated impact of the mechanism modifications were on non-residential opt-out customers. And that one is a very, very hard one to answer. What we do know is that our customers in the non-residential space that are opt-out eligible are very energy savvy, and it really comes down to an economic decision on in DEC's case on an annual basis, and in DEP currently it's a little bit longer because of the cost recovery mechanism that's currently in place for DEP. But those customers are making the economic decision on whether the incentives that they can get through participating are economically wise compared to what they would have to pay through the EE rider. While we think this mechanism has a whole bunch of opportunities for us to create new programs and more attractive programs for the customers to opt in, it's very difficult to guess or understand what a particular customer's economics will be. But what I can tell you is the company is committed, and that's one of the other reasons why we're looking for expedited approval, is we want to be able to communicate not only the new program designs and incentive levels to customers by October so that they can make their opt-in decision for DEC, but we want to be able to give them an idea of what the actual rider amount will be when we do the one-time reconciliation. The last thing we would want to do is have a customer make an opt-in or opt-out decision and not understand the true economics of that decision. So we're encouraged greatly by all of the opportunities that this will create to enhance our program offerings to non-residential customers, but really can't give you any specifics on the timing or the magnitude of that impact. And with that, if there are no questions for me, and we're going to wait till the end, I'll turn it over to Mr. Michael Quinto to talk about the system benefits.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Michael Quinto. I'm the Director of IRP Advanced Analytics for the companies. I'm glad to be here today to for the opportunity to present the overview of the methodology for valuing DSM EE system benefits. So in addition to my role as directing modeling and analytics for the CPIRP process for supporting the need and CPCN hearings, my team also works to develop business practices and analytical methods within the IRP context to inform maintaining reliability and prioritizing most reasonable least cost planning for our customers. So my team has been working on this in conjunction with Mr. Duff's team and the parties for a considerable time since the 22 carbon plan has come out. So I'm glad to be here today to provide some of the examples, the illustrative examples to the impacts to these system energy benefits. As a reminder, the system energy benefits are part of the equation for evaluating cost effectiveness for DSM and EE programs. And I'm going to walk you through the components of each of the components for the system energy benefits as shown on the slide here, which is made up of the system production cost value and the clean energy proxy value for DSM and EE. Okay, so on the top of the slide here, you'll see a fairly simplified formula. What this is looking at is this is the system production cost value of the system. So the proposed methodology uses the CPIRP modeling with two cases, a base case where energy efficiency is included, and then a change case where we remove that energy efficiency. And in each of those cases, we evaluate the cost of the portfolio. That creates a delta, a change in the production cost, and then we take that over the amount of energy efficiency that created that value to come up with a rate, $1 per megawatt hour of value that energy efficiency programs deliver based on the amount of energy efficiency on the program. So if you look at the bottom right, this is a graph of a typical summer load shape with the load represented in blue and the hours of the day across the bottom. So you'll see the dark blue on the bottom half represents the amount of load that the companies would serve with the effects of energy efficiency on the system, reducing the net amount of energy that needs to be served. On top of that, the lighter blue is the effect of energy efficiency or the amount of energy efficiency that reduces the amount of energy that needs to be served. So what happens here is when we are valuing energy efficiency's production cost value to the system, when we remove that energy efficiency from the portfolio, from the analysis, it accounts for marginal savings to the system in two ways. First is variable operating and maintenance costs. So the less amount of energy that you need to serve on the system has savings from running and operating these units. And then there's also savings from fuel. So you are, by operating these units less, you're running them less, you're consuming less fuel. And also this energy that you're saving on the margin is also served by less efficient or less cost-effective energy sources. So you are saving fuel consumption through a utilization of less efficient resources. What this doesn't capture, and this is a very traditional approach that the companies have used for valuing the system energy benefits for energy efficiency, what it doesn't capture is the contribution of the clean energy aspect of energy efficiency to the to the system. And that's really what this mechanism review from a system benefit side has been looking to enable, is how does energy efficiency fit into the energy transition and delivering clean energy benefits to the system. So that's leads us to our next slide, which is the part that really required the, thanks, Tim, required the parties to come together and figure out how to come up with a proxy value for clean energy on the system. So as Mr. Huber mentioned, through work over the last year, year plus, working on several approaches and methodologies with different parties to value EE and DSM in the context of clean energy and the energy transition. And again, this really ties back to that 2022 carbon plan enabler that the companies put forward for evaluating DSM and EE on par with non-carbon emitting supply side alternatives and appropriately valuing those EE and DSM resources in the context of other clean energy supply side resources. So through these iterations, working with the parties, discussions with the public staff and others, it was identified that a proxy for this clean energy value to the system could come from the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we could use the benefits for clean energy resources as a proxy for clean energy resources on the demand side. So through the IRA, production tax credits are available to supply side resources. And those are the value that they are ascribed is when they come online, they can receive 10 years worth of IRA production tax credits for those clean energy supply side resources. What this clean energy proxy value for DSM and EE does is we take that value that's available to supply side resources and take the current value and respread it out over the life of a typical supply side resource, 30-year solar life. So essentially taking 10 years worth of production tax credit values and spreading it over 30-year life or 30 years and applying that to energy efficiency on a levelized basis. So this is really the part of the component of the clean energy a value for system energy benefits that builds in how does energy efficiency contribute to clean energy on the system and help meet our objectives. So going to the last slide here that I have, this is a comparison of the system energy benefits of our current mechanism compared to the revised mechanism. And I've got it broken down, the revised mechanism into the two components that I've shown here. So the first, if you're looking at the solid dark blue line that kind of cuts across the page there, that's our current system energy benefits. On the bottom, the dashed light blue line represents the revised mechanism's system production cost value, just the system production cost value portion. Those green bars in between is the clean energy proxy value for DSM and EE, as discussed on the previous slide. And then that final line, the solid light blue line on top, is the total system energy benefit from the proposed mechanism. So what we're seeing here, and with this transition, with the integration of the CP IRP planning paradigm and the clean energy proxy value for DSM and EE, in 2024, we're seeing about an 80% increase in value for energy efficiency, our energy system energy benefits. This is really to be evaluated, or this allows energy efficiency to be evaluated on par with those alternative supply side resources, as the companies pointed out, and to meet those aggressive but achievable DSM and EE targets that the companies use in their planning process.
Can I just ask a question about the scale of that? Because I don't see a scale. What's the scale on the?
Yeah, so the you're probably $35 for the starting the current mechanisms, the start of that dark blue line, probably in the $35 range, if I subject to check off the top of my head.
Is each hash line a certain amount or is it?
It's, I can't remember off the top of my head, probably $10 per megawatt hour.
Okay.
I'm subject to check.
Sorry, keep going. I just wanted.
That's all I had. If there are no questions for me at this time, or I'm glad to take questions, and if not, I can.
Sure, we will get to you afterwards, but if there's a clarification question or the.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You're looking at the efficiency measures and then saying if you produced that amount of power from, say, solar, what kind of clean energy credits you would get for producing that amount of energy, and that's the value you're assigning to the efficiency?
Specifically to the clean energy proxy value, is that what you're referring to?
I think so. That's the problem. I'm a little confused on how you're valuing that energy efficiency.
Sure. So flipping back to slide 12 here, on the left side of the chart here, the dark green lines, these represent the dollar per megawatt hour production tax credits that are available to supply side resources such as clean energy supply side resources. So if I built solar or if I built wind, this is the production tax credit they would receive. We've taken the value of that 10-year supply side production tax credit and spread that 10-year total value over 30 years, the typical life of a solar plant or some other supply side resource. And then we are applying that converted number, the lighter green bars, to the annual energy efficiency values, that the production cost values. So the production cost values on an annual basis, plus these clean energy proxy values to come up with that total system energy benefit.
10 years worth of production tax credits for solar, spreading them over 30 for the EE, and is saying that that's an equivalent savings.
That's correct.
So
it's an equivalent value. We'll say that the IRA gives the value of these tax credits for clean energy, and we are saying that the supply side to be treated, the demand side, DSM and EE, treated on par with supply side alternatives, should at least get the same value that the supply side resources are receiving.
okay, I understand what you're doing. Thank you.
And I'll pass it over to Ms. Miller.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Miller, and I work in the Rates Department as the Manager of Rates and Regulatory Strategy. I'll be walking through the final question regarding the recovery of net lost revenues on the rider revenue requirements for the MyHER program. First, I'd like to make it clear that while we are showing this example as a MyHER program example, the same methodology would be used for all the residential programs. So as demonstrated on this slide, the company is currently recovering approximately $20.5 million in net lost revenues as reflected in DEC docket E-7 sub 1285. At the same time that we are recovering these net lost revenues in the EE rider, we are making a corresponding adjustment to remove those net lost revenues in the residential decoupling mechanism, or RDM rider. This will prevent double counting. In the future, if the mechanism before you is approved, residential net lost revenues will no longer be recovered through the EE rider. It will be implicitly recovered through the RDM rider. Although the residential revenue requirement in the EE rider will decrease as shown, there would be an increase to the RDM rider because we would no longer be making that adjustment to remove those net lost revenues. In other words, the amount collected from the customers over time will not change. The recovery will just move from the EE rider to the RDM rider. In addition, to ensure transparency of the calculation of net lost revenues implicitly recovered through the RDM, for informational purposes only, the company will continue to calculate residential lost revenues for reporting purposes in the same manner as the company's annual DSM EE rider filings. This will allow clear and transparent insight into the participation of our programs. This issue was one in which the company was able to compromise and find alignment through the stakeholder engagement process. The company listened to all parties during the course of the review comment period. The most important goal of the company is to provide clear and transparent information about the true cost of our programs. These programs are provided to both residential and non-residential customers, and not just North Carolina, but South Carolina as well. As DEC residential customers look at their rates, North Carolina non-residential customers and all South Carolina customers will continue to be charged through the EE rider for their programs because there is no decoupling rider, while North Carolina residential customers will be billed through a different rider. We will be able to provide the same transparency while addressing the public staff's concerns by providing the clear and insightful information of the calculation of our net lost revenues. We are already starting to have discussions with the public staff on the details of this transition. Sorry. We are already starting to have discussions with the public staff on the details of this transition, and we look forward to more of those conversations. With that, if you have any questions for me or our other panelists, we can take them at this point.
Well, thank you all very much. I have some staff questions that I'm going to ask, but before that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, and please feel free to Mr. Uber or any of the panelists. Chair Mitchell.
Just a few quick questions for you. I think, Mr. Duff, these will come to you. I appreciate your comments today. Thank you for helping us get through this material. Question about opt-outs, and you explained further sort of y'all's thinking on what may result if your proposed revisions to the mechanism are approved, and so you don't have to rehash that. I got you there. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on any specific program, but I do want to ask you about power share, because just in reviewing some information that's been filed with us related to power share, I had a couple of questions that I'm hoping you can answer, or at least kind of help my thinking on. So and I'm looking right now at the EMMV report that was filed for DEC in January of this year, just so you know, and I don't expect y'all to know this off the top of your head, but it reports that the power share program for DEC called on 160 accounts during 2 events in December, Winter Storm Elliott events, 2022. So I think one of them was called on the 24th of December and one of them was called on the 26th of December. So you called on 160 accounts, and I think they all mostly performed when they were called on. And from what I can tell, you all were able to curtail or shave around 350 megawatts. Is that ringing a bell?
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Definitely, it's been a while since I looked at the report.
Understood. Okay. And then so then I think there are roughly 4,000 or 4,000 plus eligible customers in DEC that have opted out of participating in the DSM EE program. Does that sound about right to you?
That sounds correct.
Okay. So you've got these 160 that participate in power share. And my assumption is these are customers that have not opted out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So these are all customers that could, but they haven't opted out. What can you tell me, why would these customers not opt out? What is it about these customers that has allowed them to stay in DSM EE?
So I think, again, I think it's a customer by customer basis. But my understanding, talking with our program managers in general and some of the conversations that have gone on in our collaborative, I believe it really has to do with a lot of their operational flexibility. They're being asked to shed load, and if they've got workers scheduled and people coming in, it may be more challenging for them to shed if they have deliveries that are required. So I think it really has to do with the customer's operating characteristics as is being a huge driver into in their flexibility to basically enter into these contractual arrangements to shed load when called upon.
Okay. And is it the account managers? I mean, who in the company is responsible for knowing these companies' operating characteristics or operating parameters? And
So we do leverage our large account management group to really work with customers at the time of the opt-out decision, especially for DEC with its annual basis. We work with them so that they're communicating what the economics are to see if we can get customers
Okay.
to opt in and out.
okay. And so for DEC, make sure I understand this correctly. The opt-out is made on an annual basis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And for DEP?
So DEP, because of the amortization of the program costs and utility incentive component of it, a customer is considered opted in for 3 years after the point at which they take the incentive. So it's a longer commitment. So that's why we see even higher opt-out numbers in
Got it.
DEP.
Okay, I got you. Can you speak to anything with, not asking you to rehash what you've already told us, but is there anything in specific in the revisions that y'all have proposed to this mechanism that might encourage customers that otherwise have opted out to participate?
I think the largest thing that I can identify is the likelihood to be able to change the program incentives, which will shift those economics for customers to participate. With the system benefits increasing, there's more of an ability to increase the incentives or potentially try and have different thresholds in terms of tiers, in terms of creating, well, maybe you only have to opt out of this many hours instead. And we've also talked about seeing if there's something you can do with a percentage of load for a customer to opt out. So I think what we're seeing is that the system benefits will give us the opportunity to kind of revalue the economics for customers through new incentives.
Okay. One last question for you. Same line of questions. I look at these numbers from the Power Share report, DEC, during Winter Storm Elliott, system emergency, obviously. You all were able to find 300 plus megawatts of, avoided demand there. And that's, sort of in our thinking, that's the amount that Dan River was derated during that time. There just seems to be a lot of potential there for, my assumption is, let me say that, is that there's potential there for opportunities to benefit, to serve the system in the same way. And the commission have been asking you and the collaborative, get to work on this, please look at ways that you can engage some of these customers who have otherwise opted out, to get them in and participate. We're not seeing much success there. And I hear what you're saying about your proposed revisions, and I'm not feeling overly optimistic about an increase in large customers that could otherwise opt out coming into the fold and participating. So how are we gonna get to realizing some of this potential that I'm assuming is there from these large customers? Are we gonna do it outside of the DSM paradigm, or how do we get there?
I think my personal opinion is it's a combination. You may not be able to do it all through DSM, but I am optimistic that we'll be able to enhance things. Currently, the company has a pending program, so I won't get into too many details, that was really the direct work of discussions with SIGFR and other customers and the collaborative to try and develop a more economic approach rather than mandatory approach to Power Share. Unfortunately, given where the economics were, we couldn't really provide incentives that were on the same par with what was being provided in the California program that was shared with us. So I'm optimistic that with this additional benefit, we'll be able to try and crack that economic nut that is a problem for customers trying to figure out whether or not the incentive is worth the operational interruption, if you will, that occurs with the Power Share program. And I think that's where I really am. I think there's going to be a lot more conversation, because since we'll have this additional benefit to work with, that's where we need our non-residential customers and other stakeholders who have ideas of what's worked in other states to give us input on how to best align those incentives. Is it a tiering of number of hours you're willing to interrupt? Is it a, you know, only a number of events that you can call per year to try and shrink it so it's less worrisome to customers? I think there's a whole bunch of different levers that we can try and pull, but the most exciting thing is that we now have this kind of headroom, if you will, to work on the economics.
Okay, and I see Mr. Huber's raising his hand. Did you want to say something?
Well, just to add, this is a topic that we have been thinking pretty hard about, and not just in the DSM EE context, but outside of it. And so, you know, the recent rate case approvals had reformed rate design, which give better price signals for peak demand reduction. Also, the scalability of the hourly pricing as well as another price signal that we think can lead to some response. So it is an education process from the large account side to these customers. So that's a lever. And then, you know, as we've, I believe, signaled in testimony for the CPI RP, you were looking at innovative ways to tap into backup generation and other forms of generation on site that the customer already has, and to tap into that during those system emergency days. So those are a few other levers. I agree with Mr. Duff, though, that the enhanced value from these reforms are going to give us a lot more tools to work with, to try to attract customers into these programs.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Huber. And all right, I guess, all right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Duffy, please.
Good afternoon. I'd like to ask some follow-up questions to Chair Mitchell's questions. She mentioned work done outside of the DSM paradigm, and I think Mr. Huber was explaining some of those outside the DSM paradigm. But not looking at Winter Storm Elliott because that was over the weekend, so there could not necessarily be demand response because they weren't on. But in your history with the company, when there have been other times that the company may have been worried or short, were they able to use the large account managers for the non-residential opt-out customers to reduce demand? Were phone calls made to reduce demand?
I can't tell you whether they've communicated with opted out customers. I would think, but I'm not part of that. And things that are outside of the programs, I can't really talk about. But what I can tell you is you are correct. Winter Storm Elliott was a different time for the non-residential DSM space because of the fact it was a holiday, it was a weekend, and there wasn't operations to shed. So the reduction during Winter Storm Elliott, I would say, was likely smaller than what you would have seen during more historic events. But I can't tell you specifically. I would imagine that we reach out to customers, but that my team doesn't manage that.
Okay, and where do I need to look to try to find that information?
Commissioner Duffy, we can follow up for you.
Okay, thank you. And then the second follow-up is what tariffs allowed for that, or if it was just voluntary. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Well, first, I'd like to say it's always great when stakeholders can come together and collaborate and reach a consensus on 15 out of 17 topics. So for all of you all that were involved in those efforts, I want to commend you for working through the intricacies and details that come before us, and now it's narrowed down to 2. The information you provided has been helpful and insightful. And I guess I would address this to Mr. Huber. Based upon the framework which you have today, I mean, what is it that you see moving forth that you're most optimistic about in terms of the options that you're now provided or the landscape that you're now in that can help us with these issues as we move forward?
Yeah, Commissioner, great question. I think just following up on that conversation of large customer value, I think the enhanced values that we're talking about provides more headroom and buffer to get creative. So I think that's one thing. The rapid innovation that was baked into this, I think, is really exciting because we're able to quickly test out these technologies and to gain some confidence in their operation to then quickly move them into the standard portfolio. And again, dovetails nicely with the rapid prototyping. And so I'm really hopeful that there'll be some great findings there and to get some new technologies and measures into the portfolio, because that's what this is all about. This is about figuring out what can provide the best system savings, marrying that with what customers want, right? And then linking it up and helping customers solve some of their pain points. Like we heard, if they have inefficient HVAC, okay, well, maybe there's some new technologies there that aren't standard yet that we can encourage through this mechanism. And then finally, the efficiency advocates, active load management. I think that is actually quite exciting because I think it could open up some doors to new value streams, new benefits that just haven't been a part of the traditional value stack for these programs, because they've been either sort of one-way technology or passive savings. And we're moving into a world where we have more active types of resources that have two-way communications. Just to give a few examples, smart thermostat. Well, current programs, we can call on that a certain amount of times. We leverage the vendors to manage the set point so that the customer isn't uncomfortable. So there's preheating, pre-cooling. Okay, that's great. But what if we're able to have much smaller set point changes every day to take advantage of the times when, say, solar energy is on the margin? So daily optimization with thermostats. So it's not the 3-4 degree set point change that you see during a big event, but it's a 0.5 degree set point change. If you do that across enough people, then you can actually start to see some real impacts from that. Also, it dovetails nicely with the new time of use rates. So that's an example. The other is Power Pair, which we're about to launch, and really excited about that. I think we have around 36 event calls. What if there is a local system need and we need to get those 36 to 100 times, but we will solve that specific need in that area. So that active load management would help us go out there and recruit customers that already have the batteries, but just needed to get their opt-in and a commensurate financial benefit to engage in these additional use cases for that battery. So it's leveraging the technologies that are already there for specific cases that could add more value. So those are a few that come to mind off the top of my head.
I always value your insight and perspectives and your creativity and thinking outside of the box and seeing how technology can be used in more creative ways moving forward to achieve these efficiencies. And again, I thank you all who worked on this and look forward to receiving the additional input from those that are on our agenda today during this technical conference.
Mr. Hemright?
Thank you. Mr. Huber, I think that my question's going to be about the active load management proposal, and so I assume they'll be directed to you. Okay.
To start.
Okay. And so my questions are to get a little bit more information about the DEC's responses to the public staff's concerns or objections to the proposal. And I think that to begin with, how did the efficiency advocates in DEC come up with the limitation of 20 megawatts and also the utility incentive of the 30%? Can you explain how you came up with those two parts of the program?
Yeah, I can start with my recollection and then hand it over to Mr. Duff. And as you know, these conversations are very fluid and dynamic. But as I recall on the allocation, the performance incentive allocation, that was linked to what other utilities have for these more sophisticated and complex programs. So Con Ed, for instance, in New York, has the 30-70 split for their non-wires program, which would be very similar the type of expanded use cases we're looking at here. I think Rhode Island has 30% or something north of that, and then I believe there's one other utility, maybe out west, that had the 30% to 70 from what I recall from the conversation. So I think that was just more of where is the industry going. This is relatively new in the country, so there's not that much to point to. So I think that's where that came from. And in terms of the 20 megawatts, that honestly might have just been a number that sounded good and provided enough experience to get the different valuations for a subsequent proposal. But hand it over to Mr. Duff if he has any more insights into that.
Yeah, my recollections are similar. I think the 20 megawatts was, as Mr. Huber said, you have to have enough of these kind of controlled resources to make a difference when you're talking about a small. So I think the 20 megawatt was really trying to get a meaningful threshold. But with respect to the other part of your question about what was modified based off the public staff's concerns, the company understood that the public staff was concerned about that this kind of being some sort of blanket approval or blank check. And so the company wanted to make clear that they didn't see it this way. And so that's where the language that basically said that if the company intends to include anything in this 20 megawatts, it will clearly identify that in its request for commission approval, so that there's no lack of transparency on, oh, wait, we've got 20 megawatts, we're going to measure it and move forward. Everybody should have a chance to weigh in on those proposals. And so that's why that was added, as well as a section that said it would also be vetted with the collaborative. Again, trying to increase transparency and make sure that everybody has a voice to be heard prior to the approvals and of those 20 megawatts. And then the other thing I would add is, it's important to note that this isn't moving to 30% right off the bat. The justification of these active load management programs needs to stand based off of just the existing kind of system benefit valuation that we have in the DSM framework. And then once we learn what additional values can be garnered from this active load management, then we'll determine the valuation of those. And then once that 20 megawatts and those values have been determined and a valuation created, only then would you start kind of the 30-70 split. So it was really done in a way to try and get this out here in this mechanism in building towards future mechanisms. Because again, right now, the current mechanism is really focused simply on coincident peak reductions, which has worked very well, and most of our programs are designed around that. This opens that door to the future. And then the only other thing that I would point out is that there was very clearly a protection added in right away from the initial proposal, which was that there'll be no double counting of benefits between active load management and DSM. If it's active load management, it would be in the active load management category, and DSM would be in DSM once we have those new structures established. So those were the two modifications that were done to voice concerns. Obviously, there's still other concerns, but those were the ones that I can speak to specifically that were added in to address concerns that were voiced in the stakeholder process.
And to follow up on that, my understanding of the public staff's concern is that for the future programs, for the active management future programs that would be come before the commission after going through the collaborative to be approved, that public staff says that we don't yet have any analysis of what the quantifiable benefits would be. And so public staff says essentially it's premature to have that 30-70 split for the utility incentive. And so I'd like for you to respond to that. And then also, and as along with that, why would it not be more appropriate to have the utility incentive be determined at the time that the application for that specific program comes before the commission, as opposed to having that blanket 30% utility incentive?
Sure. So I'll do my best to get to those different parts. I think that the initial valuation of the active load management programs under that 20 megawatts will not recognize any values that haven't already been determined. The whole goal of the 20 megawatts is to start to learn what those different benefits are and what the appropriate values of those are. The proposal to use 30%, I think to Mr. Huber's point, was based off of what's being done elsewhere in the industry, because these are different values, not necessarily as large as the coincident peak value. And so when you're talking about something that's going to take additional investment, and the company is essentially foregoing existing PPI because it's going to have to create more incentive for customers to participate beyond just a regular demand response 10 events a year type program, that's actually going to reduce the PPI in the short term with these 20 megawatts. So the thought was that the 30%, given the fact that we think these values will be smaller than coincident peak values, as well as the fact that it's going to take initial investment to build the systems to manage it and to run them, the 30% was kind of put in based off of what we heard from the efficiency advocates and what we saw that was being done with other utilities who have run these type of programs.
Okay. And then my last question is, can you respond to the public staff's concern that the program should be considered instead of in this docket, but to be considered instead in the non-DSM EE innovation process and the DSM EE innovation program? They said that that would be more appropriate than what's been proposed by DEC.
Sure. So I would first respond to the inclusion in the EE DSM innovation program. Frankly, the scale of that program is not designed to have a wide scale participation, which you're talking about with 20 megawatts. It's designed to, as Mr. Huber said, to test new technologies very quickly to see if they can work in programs and pilots. It's not designed to have a kind of a large scale offering like the 20 megawatts we're talking about here to kind of get that initial threshold. And then with respect to the non-EE DSM rapid prototyping, we thought that that would be very difficult to do given the interplay between DSM and active load management. This seems to be much more almost more like an more aggressive option or commitment for customers that will require a higher incentive. But it could create a lot of customer confusion to say, well, we're controlling you for this under this program and this under that program. And so it was thought that it made more sense to really build this into EEDSM because while it's not coincident peak, which is the current valuation that's recognized in the mechanism, it is still system benefits associated with shifting load and giving customers consideration for that, which meets the definition of EEDSM.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know Mr. Huber or Mr. Duff can answer this. I will start with Mr. Duff if I can. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Duff, having been in the HVAC business for 44 years, I think you're overzealous in your estimation that a heat pump will last 18 years. That is that's out of the scope pretty much. It may last 18 years. It's well maintained, but a lot of folks don't do that. They just run it until it dies, as you well know. So I don't know how that calculates in. Do I remember a number, switching horses on you, do I remember a number on this program from 10.6 down to 8.6? Or you use 9.5?
9.5 is the number for tied with achieving 1% of eligible retail sales.
Okay, so the reduction, what good comes out of it for Duke in the savings? Is that where you'll get more money as you reduce it?
So again, the company's initial proposal was no reduction, but this, we were trying to incorporate many different stakeholders' positions. And so moving from the 10.6 to 9.5 was thought to show that we were trying to move in the direction that stakeholders wanted, as well as adopting a tier where the PPI percentage could go all the way down to 3.5% or up, I believe, to 12%.
Right.
And so again, I would say it was through a process of trying to incorporate different stakeholder feedback and still have a meaningful incentive tied towards achieving that 1% of eligible retail sales goal.
So, but in the savings, though, Duke would gain more dollars, right? Do you think?
I guess I'm not quite sure I'm understanding your question.
Okay, all right. Well, let's move on. A question for you, I guess, or Mr. Huber, the commercial customers that you have, do most of those customers, those 160 that the chair mentioned earlier, that helped with the peak load demand during Winter Storm Elliott or whatever, do they have their own backup generation? Is that why they are more friendly towards opting in than the ones that opt out? Or do you know that?
I don't know off the top of my head what the percentage of those customers that have backup generation for reliability
Well,
purposes.
let me go ahead, Ms. Huber.
I was just going to say, as I recall from the list, I didn't recall a high percentage of backup generation. I recalled customers that just tended to have more flexible loads. So you could think of the crypto mining industry, for instance. That's an industry that typically can curtail for a certain amount of time. So as I think of it off the top of my head, it was more just companies that just sort of intuitively made sense of, oh, they could curtail their load without serious interruptions to operation.
Okay. Let me think out of the box a minute here. And I don't mean to get into the carbon plan, but there is a proposal in the carbon plan for additional natural gas turbines. I think everybody knows that. It's public record. It's my understanding, and Ms. Dove, you can answer this if you want to, but the numbers I have here show that the non-residential customers that were enrolled in the DSM program provided 42 megawatts during the need for Winter Storm Elliott or any kind of peak load event that requires that 42 watts versus 360, as the chair mentioned. It would seem to me that Duke would want to go after those 4,400 customers without abandon. I mean, you're going to have to go in their businesses. You're going to have to make good business incentives for them to do that. You're going to have to know those customers. And, I've heard since I've been here the word hope. We hope that program works. We hope we get more on. But to me, 360 megawatts versus 42, and you're up here with smart stats on a residential home. I mean, help me here. It seems to me that you should be absolutely more aggressive after the commercial and industrial type customers. I also think that if you were to do that, you wouldn't have to build a natural gas turbine. You could take some of the dollars you're going to build a natural gas turbine with and incentivize someone, perhaps pay a percentage of their on-site generation facility, get government monies for that because it's energy savings. You would have your peak load answer and more megawatts that you could utilize in the downturn in the peak load time in wintertime when you need it. I just don't understand why Duke won't get more aggressive with 160 in versus you got 4,400 sitting there. Now, I know there's interruptions in production and people don't want to do that, this, that, and the other. But if we move through from where I sit in 4 months and look at the cost that's going to be incurred to try to get to carbon neutral. And between that interim and when solar is in the dark curve and we don't have enough battery storage and we've got all these other things going on, you know, it would seem to me that having those customers, those industrial customers on board as a greater percentage out of those 4,400 would help us, and we wouldn't have to spend the monies on an additional natural gas turbine to have reliability, because we'd have built-in reliability without no cost to build in infrastructure. Not that there's not going to be some. That's just kind of where I'm thinking you can give them an incentive. They can put in the system, they can write it off, they can accelerate their expense write-off. There's different ways you can do that. And, you know, and that time we're still building solar farms, which this commission wants to do. We still want you to do the battery storage and get to clean energy as the law requests us to do. But between now and then, it seems like here we got some sort of an answer to some issue that we could possibly have down the road, and you could be fixing that now instead of waiting on a natural gas turbine to be built in Person County 3 or 4 years from now, and then adding 3 or 4 more and doing those kind of things while we build more solar, while we get into the more you know, study on wind and whether it's going to be reliable or cost effective or whatever. Between now and the time we hit that 2030, 2035 window that everybody's talking about before nuclear comes on, here's a big piece of load that somebody could really nail down, and I mean put a full court press on it, especially the money you spend on various programs and different things to be able to do that. I mean, Walmart was here last time at the technical conference. They talked about a diverse load from residential. There's all kinds of things, you know, that perhaps could be done that between now and then to be able to do that. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you're talking about a DSM program and you're talking about EE and you're talking where the meat is in those non-residential customers. I mean, really, really big time. And I would ask that you guys get real serious about making those efforts to make those sales calls, to learn those customers, to look at would they consider backup generation, et cetera, whether it's propane or diesel fuel. It's only going to be used in peak demand times and probably just be used in the winter. But you got 360 out of 160 customers, megawatts, versus 42 out of all this residential push that you got on. I just throw that out there for just the thought process. Perhaps I'm new and don't know any better, but I just look at everything, you know, in that perspective and see that it's very real. And I would hate for you, and I'm going to be here a few more years, come back to me and say, yeah, we got 163 customers when we had that peak load shedding in the winter of 2027, and we got 162 that helped us out. You know, it really needs to be a greater number, and I just press you on doing that.
No, I appreciate that, Commissioner Tucker. What I would say is that the company isn't hoping to be more aggressive. It believes with this new mechanism, it will be more aggressive with respect to trying to make the programs attractive. And we have done other things within the structure. We've added opt-in windows to try and align better with customers' capital budgeting. We've split DSM and EE to try and allow customers to shift the economics and only focus on if they want to participate in EE programs or DSM. But yes, we are 100% committed to being more aggressive with our program designs to make them more attractive. I guess what we're trying to say, though, is we can't firmly guarantee that customers will elect to participate. And so we will do everything we can to make those programs attractive within the bounds of cost effectiveness. But the only thing that we were trying to represent with optimism or hope was the level of participation and when that participation will come.
Well, you know, I'm just looking at the fact you're going to spend millions on a natural gas turbine, and you could take some of those dollars and offset some of their upfront costs for backup generation, and then the deal's done and their option to come in, and they'll have flexibility in production and all that. Or, you know, they could run the load at a limited capacity through their own generation. Because if we get to a point where we've got a significant event It's not going to be, opt out, opt in. It's going to be, hey guys, we're shutting you off, and you can live with it. That way you can overcome that. But of course, Duke's done a tremendous job. Historically, there's only been one major load shedding event ever. So, I mean, my hat's off to you about that. But I mean, I just think we're sitting here looking at a gold mine of an opportunity to do some DSS incentives and check with the feds and see what availability they have. There's money flowing all around up in Washington. They don't know they think it's their money. But at any rate, I just ask that you pursue that. And again, I'm just looking at it from 50,000 feet. I've just been here a short time, but to me, it makes sense. I think I could go sell it with a little bit of incentive myself. That's what I've done all my life. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Did you want to respond, Mr.?
Oh, just briefly, Commissioner Tucker, if I may, just that I agree with you on this. I'm tracking with you, and I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by some upcoming filings. I think the other thing is the rate design that we put forward that, is very new. We used to have this on-peak window that was, 6-8 hours long, right? We compress that to 3 to get that sharp focus and that economic incentive without having to enroll in a program. I think that these enhancements are a great big first step in getting that value right, to your point of what's that value of that next peaker, right? And making sure that it's aligned so that the customer's receiving the benefits to opt into the program. So we're starting to hit on all cylinders, and I agree with that sentiment. We've got to do more. We're going to be working on that hard. And it's the simple fact of we've got gigawatts of economic development coming to this state. So we're going to need all the generation on the supply side we can get. And we need to do all the absolute most we can do on the customer side as well. And so that's going to take creativity. And to your point, pounding the pavement, talking to customers, seeing what they can do. We're going to have to get some new program approvals as well, to outside of this contract, full transparency, but we are working on those with stakeholders as we speak to bring forward to you so that we are using all the levers possible. And we think from the rate design and the hourly pricing, that's relatively new. That was recently approved. We think we can get hundreds of megawatts there. I believe we put 400 to 600 megawatts in the CPIRP from just that rate design response alone, because you don't need to shut off anything. It's up to the customer to optimize. We'll continue to automate on that as well. But I just wanted to add to that we are looking at any and everything, because to your point, this is such a huge customer population with a lot of load, to try to work with these companies on a one-to-one basis, because a lot of it's tailored, and to come up with a suite of options that they want to partake in.
Well, thank you, sir, for that comment, and I'll hold you to it, okay? I know where to find you. Thank you.
That's right.
All right. Well, I do have some staff questions, and I have some follow-up questions on some of my colleagues' questions. Let's start with some of the new things, or at least some of the changes. One of the goals of the technical conference was, even on the things that we were happy you could all agree with, we just wanted a little bit more information on the impact. What are the big things, and what are the maybe exciting things, but relatively modest things. So on that last category, from what you've presented, this measure life adjustment factor, sort of a new kind of tool in the toolbox. I mean, it seems quite modest. I think you kind of said that yourself. It seems quite modest. I wanted to have a clarification of just how it's calculated. When you said it's the weighted average life, are you doing that? And I apologize if this was right in front of me, but are you doing it weighted on this annual savings, or is it weighted on expenses, or how is it actually being weighted?
It's weighted on the savings. So what's generating the savings?
Okay. Well, I just have to, I guess, just run the math again. It just, I was having trouble with, they seem like pretty high ratios. I mean, I think it's like over 6.29, 8.83 for debt. So that's, so in, a year, is that saying that's years, right? That's
Those are years, yes.
I just, the My Her program dominates, it just really, it really dominates your portfolio. And, that's, 75% of the residential savings, I think over 50% of and that's just a 1-year program. So how did, I just, wouldn't that weight it down closer to 1?
No, you have to, so that's the overall portfolio measure life. We didn't break it down between residential and non-residential. And so when you're looking at across the non-residential, where you're talking about larger pieces of equipment, you're talking about, like I said, heat pumps, HVACs, which, well, I recognize Commissioner Tucker's statement. Those are kind of what the external experts and studies we have recognized associated with the measure life. So no, that's based off of the annual KWH contributed in the vintage 2023, which is what you're looking at.
Okay. Is that in the Reiner calculation? Is that in the, just that how you broke up that calculation?
We can get the calculations if you want. It's not presented in the rider filing as an exhibit, no.
Okay. Well, I would just be curious. I mean, to see,
Certainly.
it must be some long life measures on the
But it's a great one. Obviously, if My Her continues to be a higher percentage of the savings, and then you're going to see that decline, and you'll see the RMAF reduce the PPI because of it.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. And I guess that second part was what you just said, is that it just did seem kind of modest as far as driving behavior, major behavioral change. So, were there anything else, any other options looked at to try to get to this longer life, kind of measures put in? Because I just think that's a goal in a lot of states, is to kind of push toward these longer life measures, and what we have in front of us. It's a start for sure, but it does seem relatively modest compared to a lot of the other incentives. So was there something else that was discussed, or is there something that we could, in the future think about as well?
So what I would say is that, when we discuss with parties, and I think it's important that everybody understands, the PPI currently awards or rewards longer life measures. And you see that with such a small percentage of the overall PPI that My Her is, because it's a 1-year measure life. So because PPI is based off of that net present value of the avoided cost, longer life measures are going to lead to more of a PPI. And so this was designed to more explicitly put it in. And while it doesn't have a huge impact to the EE rider, if you look at the total between the residential and non-residential, it's about $1 million that you're talking about of an increase. And we don't think that's insignificant. We think that's a motivating factor, especially when you put that on top of the fact that the existing PPI already recognizes longer lived measures. So I think when we talked about that with stakeholders, it was kind of an agreed upon approach that would appropriately put an additional incentive beyond the existing PPI on those longer lived measures.
Okay, well, I'm anxious to see it. And again, it's a great, I'm glad that you addressed it, but I was just, the magnitude is a little bit modest. There was a couple comments that you had talked to my colleagues about the headroom. I think you had used the term headroom for part of your optimism for the non-residential DSM program. When you say headroom, I think what I'm understanding is you have a company that right now you can only offer so much incentive, because then it won't be cost effective if you go up. But when you add, especially if it's a pretty significant increase to the incentives, won't that just make the rider more expensive? I mean, won't because you said that for the non-residential, it's an economic decision. So if you have an incentive that benefits the participants, but everybody has to pay that increased price, how is that going to really change the economics for the entire rider? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So I think you have to look at it appropriately, Commissioner Hughes, that you've got essentially you're increasing one component of cost. There's fixed program costs, there's other program costs that factor into the DSM rider. When you're talking about efficiency, you're talking about lost revenues are also a component of it. So it's more than just the incentive. It's not like a dollar for dollar. Well, you increase the program cost by giving a higher incentive. That's going to translate to this much of a rider increase. So we do think there's an opportunity to enhance the overall economics because it's not just a direct pass through of the incentive costs.
It's good. I mean, I hope you're right. Have you done some analysis, just looking at, some hypothetical or some of your customers, just running the numbers through about, what kind of higher incentives could you offer this, entire customer base, and how that would pass through as far as the rider increases?
We have not done that yet. We're trying to wait on that. It's a tremendous amount of work to do the modeling. So we haven't done that. And frankly, the system benefits was one of the last pieces that we kind of got alignment in terms of the mechanism revisions. So no, that has not been done yet, but that will be done as we talk about kind of moving forward to get ready, is understanding how pulling those different levers will impact the rider as well as the incentive to the customers.
Okay, well, I think I personally would look forward to that, and I think you can hear the excitement and the urgency of tapping into this, and I understand it's not all on your shoulders with the DSM rider, that Mr. Hoover's going to take over a lot, but I think anything you can provide us moving forward for what size magnitude should we look for from the DSM bucket versus the rate bucket would be really, really helpful. I think you talked a little bit about thermostats, mainly for the active load management. Is there any other types of technology or technology, and just briefly you could say, that's in that bucket now that we might see other than the thermostats?
Yes, Commissioner. Hot water heaters are a really good one. Some of the more new advanced technologies allow some very granular control of those, and again, in a daily optimization type of use case. So that is one. We're hoping smart panels as well, and that might go through the innovation arm of this first before getting to prime time. But smart panels, and then there's also smart inverters in different settings that can be controllable and tuned to whatever that local distribution need could be. And of course, there's batteries, which we're particularly excited about. And this is, gets to another point of, expanding that, learning from Power Pair, looking at other customer segments to expand battery programs. But there's some recent evolution in batteries where they're coming down in cost and providing more peak demand capabilities. So the new Powerwall 3 is coming out with some really good technical stats that we're seeing in a few other companies like Franklin Energy and Sonnen and others are jumping in with some new offerings. That it's been a relatively sort of stagnant market up until recently. So all those will when they're enrolled in the DR program, we can go and say, hey, can we use your battery more? Here's the increase in incentive for you. And to Mr. Duff's point, that's sort of the big compromise in all this. We're willing to take that hit on PPI and that complexity in the near term to try to make way for this in the long term, and try to get in as many technologies as we can to see how they can have a piece of these more complex use cases.
Thanks for that. I think there was some mention in your comments, but I think about using third parties. I think it was more general services, maybe companies that manufacture this, but there is a lot of discussion these days about third-party aggregators and is that part of the plan of the ALM or any of the other? Is Duke currently working with some of the the big aggregators that are kind of want to have a webcast every week about how great they are?
Yeah, yeah, and you hear the term virtual power plant thrown out a lot, and
Just 3 or 4 times today.
yeah, and we've of course been doing this for decades. We called it it's more distributed power plants, and they're very real, they're not virtual. But so we work with pretty sophisticated parties, like an Energy Hub, for instance. So Energy Hub runs our thermostat programs, and they'll be running the Power Pair program. Because a lot of times there's no direct interface between the utility and the equipment manufacturer. They have APIs that are specific, and for the cost of Duke hiring a team of coders to constantly keep the APIs updated from a cost effectiveness standpoint, it made sense to partner with a third party like Energy Hub that is constantly making these connections to different types of batteries and so forth. And I think then there's also just third parties that provide optimization services that we'd be looking into, because as these resources, these controllable resources are out there and at the grid edge, we cannot hire a person to just watch that one circuit and press the button when we need it. There has to be some automation here and sophisticated algorithms to figure out just when and how much to hit the button in a given situation when a certain event arises. And so that's where we're looking for partners as well, and building up those capabilities. So part of the 20 megawatts would be finding these partners and testing it out to see how it works, and if we're able to capture those values for customers.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. If none of you are prepared to answer this, I don't want to spend a lot of time. I know we're going on, but there was a big part of the modifications was to move these non-energy benefits into the mechanism in some way, and we haven't talked a lot about it because I think it was something that there was consensus about. But there were some actual numbers put in the mechanism related to the ratios of non-energy benefits to, I guess, energy benefits. And I think it was a 179, no, excuse me, it was 2.22, which is a pretty high, multiplier. So I think if I understand it correctly, then for the TRC moving forward, there'll be a 2.2 times value of the benefits. So it's a pretty high number. We had staff looked at some of the background in the SCUMATS, is that how you say it? The SCUMATS report, and they were just having a hard time kind of coming up with that calculation. Do you know how that was done?
My recollection, it was taken directly from a table in the SCUMATS report. But we can follow up and get that.
Okay, yeah, that was just a request. If you could double check it and maybe just follow up. There was a reference, and another big thing that was asked, and I think that was addressed, was to harmonize the approach toward incentives and expenses costs. And I understand that that's going to be done moving forward, that DEP is no longer going to do a 3-year amortization. So is that
2026 will be the last year of amortization. When talking through it with parties, we felt that it made a lot of sense to align it with the potential move to 1U from a customer's confusion and kind of perspective. So yeah, the last year the DEP will amortize would be vintage 2026.
Okay, and that will address, I think, your concern that you said at least sometime after that you can have the non-residential opt-out and opt-in harmonized.
Correct.
This is more of a broad question. You still focus a lot on the percentage of eligible retail sales as, I would say probably a leading metric for the mechanism, and it's in the carbon plan as well as the mechanism, 1% or whether ambitious 1.5%. It just to me seems like that's a very EE oriented metric, and we've been talking a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement about the DSM side. And just, was there discussion about kind of rising up or kind of, and maybe it's there, it just hasn't risen up to the same level of the percent sales. But I was just curious because we often say percent sales, but that doesn't seem to reflect a lot of what we are going for DSM.
It was discussed, Commissioner Hughes. I think there was some confusion and potential concern about the fact that while it's important, we look at savings for summer and winter. And so you'd have to develop targets. And right now, we're not trying to actively add to summer since we're winter planning and not recognizing incremental value from summer. So I think the thought was there's a lot of complexity and that the EE modeling assumption of 1% made sense for that performance tier. I think that's something that likely would get addressed in future mechanisms. But for this one, I think that parties felt like this was an appropriate, easy, transparent means that tied to a number that was meaningful to a whole bunch of stakeholders through the carbon plan.
Okay, we're going to try to wrap up and give the court reporter a break. But let me see if I can just get one quick question in. So how does that metric that we just talked about, how do you see that moving forward with some of these huge load increases that you've been talking about, particularly for a residential EV? I've heard a little bit that metric is starting to be a little bit more complicated now that you are loading up more load with something that might be harder to do EE with. So was that discussed? And I mean, right now it's all in here, right? I mean, the EV load is going into that 1% calculation, if I understand.
Yes. Since that's the currently adopted carbon plan to use that modeling assumption, parties felt that was the appropriate measure. I think the company would agree that it makes it more aggressive to continue to assume 1% with EV adoption in the residential space. But I think it's something that parties felt was still an appropriate measure, particularly now since we put the performance in that would recognize higher PPI for achieving more than the 1% or reduce it for achieving less than 1%.
Okay, I thank you for confirming what my guess was. I think we're going to really quick.
Yeah, just a query or point of information. I know we have about 6 presenters and it's about 3:53. I did not know the extent to which the remaining presenters had commitments beyond 5 p.m. today, because it's obvious to me that we want to be fair to each and every group or entity that was going to provide us with information today. And so I just wanted to see what your thoughts were about.
We're going to take a break and we're going to huddle about that. And so we'll ask that. It's a good point. I think Duke did have the bulk of it from as far as content and questions from our perspective. But if you want to comment, Ms. Keyworth.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I just wanted to let the commission know that one of our speakers, Jeff Thomas, does need to leave at 4:30 today. We're the next team up, and so we can simply make him available for questions first before our presentation, to the extent that the commission has questions on system benefits for the public staff, if that works for you all.
Okay. Well, how about the other, while we're going down the list, any other? If we need to go to 5:30 or 6.
That would be fine for me, Commissioner, and we don't need the full 30 minutes.
That's fine for SIGFR as well. And
We don't have any time. We don't have any time limitation.
Okay, well, let's take the court report. Thank you very much. I know you're long to a break. So we'll be back here at 4:10, and I'll also consult with my colleagues a little bit about time management. But yeah, we can start with Mr. Thompson. 10 minutes. How about 4:05? Okay, let's go back on the record. And I think our goal is to get Mr. Thomas through as fast as possible. Your presentation wasn't very long. I mean, do you still want to do that? And then we'll go right to Mr. Thomas or?
So thank you, Commissioner Hughes. We'd prefer just to start with Mr. Thomas, and then we can follow that with, and to be clear, Mr. Thomas he does not have a presentation to make, but he's available for questions from the commission on the topic of system benefits, if there are any.
Okay, I think it will be pretty quick.
Okay.
So
with that then, if Jeff Thomas, Michelle Boswell, and David Williamson can come to the witness table.
Okay, so for those of you that just sat down, what we're going to do is public staff does have a short presentation, but Mr. Thomas is here as a resource for the system benefit calculations and modifications. So before we hear from the presentation, if you have any questions related to that, and that I'm assuming includes like the new proxy value for the, so we'll go with that.
And the panel is ready for questions, or I should say Mr. Thomas is ready for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, so what Commissioner McKissick, what we're doing now, Mr. Thomas is going to be leaving us shortly. If you have a question related specifically to the new model for the system benefit calculations, and that's the chart that they presented where there's the new proxy value with the IRA, we're going to ask it. We're going to ask that. So, meanwhile, I'm looking through my questions. Does anybody have a question for?
Would this be the witness to explain the public staff's objections to the load management program?
I don't think so, but I think the other.
Okay.
All right. Well, since we did this big build up, I'll go ahead and ask you. I'll go ahead and ask you one. In your comments, you talked about some estimates for what that change would have, the impact it would have on the PPI. I know there's a lot of moving targets, but it was a fairly high number, if I recall, in the 20s or 30s percent. So just that change to have the new system value, if nothing else changed, it was going to have a fairly significant increase. Could you just talk a little bit about that in general numbers? We saw the Duke presentation, just a nice graph on the actual value going up, but how about your feelings about what that means for the entire PPI and incentive? Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah, I can talk. Is this on? Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. Mr. Williamson may add a little bit more. I know he deals with these programs of recovery more intimately than I do, but I think that does kind of illustrate some of the, some of our concerns about increasing the system benefits to facilitate potentially more programs, is that there is a bit of a timing mismatch, right? We're trying to decide on what the appropriate inputs are. But the analysis that kind of Duke put together that showed that large impact, I believe, really showed just the impact of the system inputs change without an increase, a commensurate increase in the program costs. And so I think what we're really focused on, and what one concern we discussed in our applied comments, is there is a risk that the system inputs figure could rise, but if the incentives and the participation in that program doesn't rise proportionately, if you value avoided capacity twice as much, you should be able to pay customers twice as much to reduce their capacity during peak times. If that doesn't happen, if there is a mismatch, there is a risk there that we could see costs go up when the benefits aren't going up proportionally. And so I think that's one thing that we've been, David and Mr. Williamson and Ms. Boswell have been working very hard with the company on to make sure that these increases of the system benefits, reflecting the value of this kind of round the clock carbon-free energy, are leading to expanded programs and more generous offerings so that we can see those savings come down to kilowatts and kilowatt hours.
Right. And so one of the things that was a main point for the public staff from this whole process is changing the avoided costs. I left that completely in the wheelhouse of the modelers of Jeff Thomas and Duke and their modeler, Michael Quinta. Sorry about that. But one of the main concerns of the public staff was that there was a huge push to update the system benefits, but there wasn't an equal push to update and modify the rebates that the customers would see as that benefit. And so it was very important to the public staff to try and get an equal change to increasing the benefit that the utility would see while also increasing the benefit that the customers would see. And so to your point of the PPI, those two factors both are impacted by those two buckets. So instead of just updating the avoided costs, there's a proposal in a few months to also update the benefits and the rebates and the incentives that the customers would experience, which translate into those program costs. And so the PPI, while we don't know what those rebate changes or incentive changes will be, the PPI will not be just a reflection. The PPI that will be in the rider will not just be a reflection of increased avoided costs.
Okay, that's helpful. Do you predict, I know this is probably a question for Duke, but with the reconciliation and the time frame that this is going on, are we going to see both these higher incentive programs? Do you expect to see these higher incentive programs in 2025 along with the higher system benefit calculations, or is there going to be a year where there's higher system benefit costs, but the incentives haven't caught up?
So that's one of the discussions that we were having, is a little bit of that lag. And that's why in the reply comments, I think the utility addressed it, and I believe we did as well, certain pre-filing type items to help expedite that huge lift that will be whenever will be that filing, because the utilities will come in to update rebates and such for all programs that offer rebates, because some programs like MyHer don't offer a rebate option. It's just informational with the EE savings ideas and stuff. But for items like the Save Water and Energy kits, different rebates might be able to increase the items that are in those kits, might be able to increase the HVAC incentive that's being offered as a result. Those types of items will be in that big filing, but it'll be many programs, and that's where we'll be able to see the changes in rebates as they're proposed. And public staff and the company have already had conversations about that process and what that might look like, and we're going to work pretty quickly to try and get that done so that they can be ready for the 2025 vintage year.
Okay. Well, that's the only question I have. I appreciate all that detail. Any other questions for Mr. Thomas? All right. Well, if you need to run, you can feel free. I think you are going to go ahead now with the presentation, and we'll talk about some of the other issues and some of the other concerns, Commissioner Raleigh, that I think you want to ask questions for. So we'll keep going with that. Yeah, they're going to do now. We just had to move in. All right, so that's a challenge for the two of you remaining on the panel. So thank you. Yeah, you can be excused. And thanks for everyone being flexible with us moving around.
All right. So I guess moving on to the presentation. So active load management, public staff provided a number of different issues and concerns on active load management in our reply comments. And these next couple slides are just kind of summarizing those. So I'll go relatively quickly. So I just want to be extremely clear. The public staff is not necessarily opposed to the concept of active load management, or really the concern is that we believe that it's a little premature to include language that's directed to program design into the company's cost recovery mechanism. And so some of the concerns that we had in our reply comments was the concerns related to hard-coded language about a program that may may expand beyond the realm of DSM and EE that's currently in place. And kind of what's driving that is the conversation in the the efficiency advocates. I think it was their initial comments where they were addressing grid edge activities as a big driver for this type of concept. But just to clear for the record that it's an DSM and EE rider and it's not a grid edge rider. And so while grid edge may hold DSM EE in that much broad definition, grid edge itself is not DSM EE. And then on top of that, the DSM EE collaborative, just for conversational purpose, because it is program design as a concept for active load management, the EE collaborative would be the most ideal place for these conversations to be had to try and figure out if this type of concept or program could be possible to go into the rider. And then there are a number of pending dockets that I believe Mr. Huber with the company addressed with the rapid prototyping, both DSMEE and non-DSMEE, that I think that this type of program or this type of concept would be, regardless of the financial hurdles that the company addressed that might make it inopportune, the research that those types of those types of processes could have on this type of program, I think would be the more appropriate to try and do research on program types to figure out where exactly within this regulatory construct of what rider does this belong into? Does it belong in a rider at all type process? So some of the items that we brought up as concerns was the new savings categories. Primarily, there's avoided energy, avoided capacity, and avoided T&D as primary avoided cost savings. Some of the new ones that have been addressed here are enhancements to resource adequacy, reduction to grid congestion, and then efficiently managing variable renewable energy output. And then, so one of the things that we'll need to figure out along the way and potentially through research is how to value those with respect to DSM and EE. Those types of variables may provide incremental benefit, they may not. At this point in time, we just don't know. There hasn't been much discussion on what those types of values would be in this space. So for the proposed incentive, the incentive proposed by Duke and the efficiency advocates is it's approximately 3 times the size of what the proposed mid-level PPI percentage. So currently the proposed mid-level PPI is about 9.6%, I believe. And then the shared savings approach that they've proposed is a 70-30 split. And so this is, I believe Mr. Huber brought it up, is kind of based off of the Con Ed construct on the non-wires alternative. But I'm not familiar with their structures up there, but I do know that they're in a market. So I don't know what type of programs non-wires alternatives might get, considering that they're connected to similar to PJM. They just have the ability to offer generation and EE and DSM through aggregated resources through that market. And so it is a little bit different construct down here in North Carolina versus up in Con Ed's territory, just because of the market structure itself. And then the language and the mechanism that's been proposed, public staff doesn't believe that there's anything in the current mechanism or in the current general statutes or commission rules that would prohibit the company from already proposing a program like this. And so if it is eligible to be in the EE rider, there's no need to include language that would definitively put it into the EE rider. And that kind of goes into my earlier comment about it trying to understand where programs that would fall under this concept would need to go or where they should go. And then companies are free to initiate a market potential study of sorts in order to do more research to better understand this concept of active load management or virtual power plants, VPP, and the appropriateness of which they would be included or not included in this rider. And then I guess to just kind of close it off, just I guess want to be very clear for the record that the public staff is interested in exploring this concept, but for purposes of the DSM cost recovery mechanism, it's premature at this time to make any changes specific to program styles and designs. The public staff is always appreciative of looking outside of North Carolina to try and figure out what other states and other utilities are doing in order to make what we're offering here in North Carolina better. But I think that the regulatory structure differences might need to be reviewed as well. And lastly, it's currently unclear whether or not the active load management proposal, kind of going off of some previous conversations with the previous panel, is whether or not that active load management is currently already being acknowledged just by different names, whether it be through existing DSM EE programs or through tariffed DSM, and I'm going to call it tariffed DSM, whether it's through rate designs of sorts where the company or the company's making an offering where they're incentivizing usage from customers at particular times or avoiding usage at particular times through the retail rate that they're being charged. And that's all we have.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there's any questions. Mr. Duffy.
Just one quick question. You mentioned about the shared savings split of 70-30 and then stated that Con Ed was in a different market construct or market structure. Are you just pointing that out or do you have a different split number?
I don't have any particular, we haven't really discussed any other type of structure for a program like this, mainly because we don't know the extent of what type of savings would come in and what we're actually incentivizing and what the company would be incentivized to do. One of the things that was highlighted in comments, and I can't remember who, I believe it was the efficiency advocates, either probably the initial comments, was there was a cite to how performance incentive mechanisms could be a barrier broken for this type of structure. And it kind of goes back to where this type of concept would be best fit. And it could have been a program that would be very, very good for the company's performance incentive mechanism programs that they have or had in the most recent general rate cases in order to offer a very defined performance incentive on a very defined performance structure.
Okay, thank you for that.
And Mr. Williamson, very, very briefly, just following up on some of the questions I had for Duke's panel. I know that the public staff's position about the active load management is objection to the definition being included and also to the 30% utility incentive. If Duke's testimony was that they believe that 70-30 split or the 30% incentive is appropriate and warranted, but if that incentive was determined at the time of application, would the public staff still have the same objection to including the definition here, the definition of active load management?
So I guess the definition of active load management that it's proposed still brings me a little bit of concern because of how broad the definition is. And it kind of goes back to that conversation about addressing grid edge level reductions. And so it's trying, to me, I'm trying to make sure that we're not expanding what is truly DSM-EE And by allowing a definition that would kind of go by expanding the definition and putting it in the mechanism, I don't know without a particular program design in mind, because like I said, it's just been a concept to date as far as what active load management could be. I don't know if that means that similar to power pair, where some costs went into one rider and some other costs went into the DSME rider because there was a DSM component as well as a solar rebate. Two different riders, essentially the same program, just broken up into different initiatives so that the costs were collected in the most appropriate manner. I don't know if this would eliminate that ability to keep costs in the more appropriate place.
Okay. I certainly understand, but that is an argument that potentially could be made at the time an application is before the commission as well, that you could make that argument at that time.
Yes.
Nothing would preclude the public staff from making that argument when the application came before the commission.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner McKissick.
I'm just curious, have you given thought to what the variables might in fact be to sit here and evaluate, enhanced or maintained resource adequacy, reduce grid congestion, efficiently manage, variable renewable energy output? I mean, I understand where you are in terms of saying it's not ready yet. It needs to be studied, evaluated. But if you were to look at those issues and were to try to define what parameters might be involved, have you given any thought to that at this time? And if so, what are those thoughts?
I think that those items would need substantial discussions on what would go into them, how would they be evaluated, where would they be evaluated? Because similar to the avoided costs for DSME, where before these mechanism revisions, the avoided energy and avoided capacity rates were kind of being derived from the avoided costs proceedings. And now the proposal is to switch to the CPIRP as the deriving, document for how to value those savings. And so I don't know, I don't typically, Mr. Thomas was here, he would be able to help me with this, but I don't know where those types of savings would be most adequately addressed. Whether it be the avoided costs, whether it be the CPIRP, I'm not sure.
So at this point in time, I guess public staff's position is you need to continue to flesh through this idea and kind of conceptualize it more before we actually address it within this context.
That's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the panel? Okay, thank you very much. Be excused. Mr. Neal?
Commissioner Hughes, do you want us at the council table or?
Come on up here. Get to see how it feels.
New experience.
You're never supposed to ask your question unless you know what the answer is going to be, right? Is that that?
I can go either way. Good afternoon, commissioners. Again, David Neal, on behalf of a number of clients, we'll just refer to as the efficiency advocates.
And Ethan Blumenthal on behalf of NCSEA. Thank you.
So again, as stated, I don't think we need to go through a whole presentation. I do want to highlight a couple of things that I hope will be responsive to some things that have already come up. That the Brattle report that we submitted in its entirety on Friday, in addition to the RMI report, I think kind of highlight what's happening in the industry around the country, where we see system benefits that go beyond peak load reduction. Though peak load reduction still is a key value, and we wanted to really just emphasize that this Brattle report looked at a typical utility and said, if it has a 400 megawatt resource adequacy need, and we could fill that with a gas plant, with utility scale batteries, or with aggregating thousands of devices behind the meter with some of these automated distributed energy resource management systems. We see a lot of benefits from a grid optimization point of view from going with what Brattle and RMI refer to as virtual power plants. We preferred the term active load management because that's what we're enabling Duke to do, is to start controlling those devices after they've enrolled customers on a voluntary basis. So again, we can run through some of these. One of the things the Brattle report highlighted is we're at an inflection point that customers are already adopting a lot of these technologies. So the time is right to start getting them used to this idea that there could be active management from the utility. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to really drive customer adoption of a lot of these technologies, whether that's the batteries on their homes, the electric vehicles that we can choose when they're charged or not charged, the smart thermostats, et cetera. So we think that the time is right to start moving down this road. We thought this was an important thing to highlight too, that Duke would not be a first mover. This is happening around the country. The Green Mountain Power program is, I think, been a real pioneer in the behind the meter storage component of this. Obviously, the power pair pilot that's been referenced, we think is important. The key here is going beyond batteries and saying, well, let's look at a whole suite of potential technologies. And there's, again, a number of these that are highlighted here that are of a similar scale of, okay, we'll start this like the PG&E, a 30 megawatt solar plus storage VPP. So this question was earlier risen about why 20 megawatt limitation. I want to be clear, it's not a limitation. The idea was we've got to start somewhere. So let's get a threshold of capacity that will be meaningful to study and determine what those additional values are. We also thought that a lot of what's in the mechanism is really are carrots to Duke. It is an incentive mechanism. And given that we're trying to avoid investments in more expensive infrastructure like new gas plants, what is the incentive we can offer for them to start really going down this road? It's our sense that those additional values that kind of, that were alluded to by Mr. Williamson of reducing grid congestion, of more efficiently managing variable energy output. Our sense from what we've seen around the country is that's going to be a smaller pie than the value of peak demand reduction. They're going to feed into each other. And as you enroll customers in active load management, it can also serve that peak load reduction function. But because it's our anticipation that that's going to be a smaller pie, we thought it made sense to say at the outset, so Duke has a reason to begin investing in distributed energy resource management systems and to do the learning, to do the EMNV, the evaluation, measurement, and verification, to really determine what those values are. It makes sense to have a goalpost to say, all right, you do that work, at the end of that road, you're going to get this shared benefit. It can always be reevaluated later on, but we thought as a starting place, it made sense. And again, given what we'd seen from some of these other utilities, but trying to stay with a shared savings framework so that they only get that incentive if there are those benefits, if there are those customer benefits. I know we talked about some other things we wanted to highlight. I think the important thing is leveraging. This really is a leveraging opportunity. Customers are going to be making these investments. It's going to be customers who are buying the EV or the home charger or the battery or the smart thermostat. The incentive to enroll in this program is going to leverage those resources to provide those system benefits. And we think that's a real key aspect of this that'll help to drive those system savings.
Yeah. Thank you. If I may add a few points as well. Just to follow up on that immediate point, I think the timing aspect is key here as we have these federal incentives coming down. We're considering, I know the commission is considering many things on your plate. As customers have different incentives and different programs put in front of them, there's, and I think the Brattle report lays this out, a window of time in which they are thinking about how to use these incentives most effectively. And that's where, as David said, we think this is a smaller pie of benefit than the peak load reduction one, but that nonetheless means it is still a pie of benefits out there that we are currently not recognizing and that the customers are currently not being, I guess, activated for. They could be provided to the utility system benefit, which provides benefits to the entire system, but there are also specific benefits that once that EMNV is done and shown and proven, could then flow to the customers that are being asked to make those investments and further incentivize those customers to make those investments. So we see that as providing the full value stack of the benefit that the customer is being asked to provide to the system and really incentivizing that behavior. I would also want to point out, while we may not know exactly what the level of these benefits are here in North Carolina, we do know that these potential benefits exist. You can look around the country. There are programs that are existing, that are working right now, such as the APS program with smart thermostats down in Arizona is one in particular that shows how large numbers of distributed smart devices can be leveraged for utility system benefit in this way, beyond just coincident peak reduction. So that's another one that I'd want to highlight. And finally, I think to address some of the public staff concern about the definition and the breadth of the definition. As the utility has said, each of these programs that is proposed for this incentive would be clearly marked and clearly demarcated as it's put before the commission. So to the extent that any proposed program might be overly broad, there will be an opportunity to address that at the time that individual program is actually proposed. And so there is a reason to have the definition not preemptively preclude potential new technologies that are coming down the line or may be coming down the line. Rather, let that determination be made when the programs are individually proposed. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Duffy.
So on that last point, as I understood, the public staff's argument is they, through the adoption of this definition, they did not want to be precluded to make the argument in a particular application for a new program. And I hear you saying, and I assume Duke feels the same way, that no one would make the argument against public staff saying, when they argue and say, this is really grid edge, it's not, it doesn't fit within the traditional definition of DSM under Chapter 62. No one, you're saying no party's going to come back to the public staff and say, well, no, it fits within the definition, within the mechanism, and so you can't make that argument. Is that what I'm hearing?
Without speaking for the utility, of course, yes, I would caution a yes, because you shouldn't say that it is there, so that means it necessarily is defined as energy efficiency or demand side management. Though I think, of course, without having a specific argument in front of me, there would probably be good faith arguments back and forth as the definition of perhaps demand side management with current smart technologies as they continue to evolve, both on the hardware and software side, that may be, for lack of a better word, that may be a little fungible on the edges. I'm not sure exactly where that will be, but that's, I think, perhaps why it's better left for the argument when the time is there.
Okay, and actually, Lon Huber, I'm going to put you on the spot since you're still here.
Where's my fun card? Oh, there it is. Yeah, here we go. Make it official. Yeah, Commissioner Duffy, you're absolutely correct. We wouldn't say, oh, well, we're going to block you from even talking about this. I think there'd be a spirited discussion, of course, but we wouldn't say, oh, since it's in this, we can't have that debate.
Mechanism definition, you're
Right.
hard. Okay,
Right.
okay.
Can I just
Thank
add that as I hear the public staff's concern there, I was reminded of the spirited debate around the solar incentive that was offered and rejected, that then laid the framework for the power pair. And it came up in discussions, and that would rooftop solar somehow fit this definition? And our response was no, because you can't actively manage rooftop solar. So we thought that the definition covered that particular concern for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you for that. And then one more question about, you mentioned that APS manages over 500 smart thermostats and talked about the large number of distributed energy can really make a dent. And so with these other programs that are around the country, like what percentage enroll in these types of programs of the whole base? And is it residential in that instance?
Yes. So the number I was quoting, I believe, was 50,000 smart thermostats, though they are targeting 100,000 smart thermostats, and that is residential. That is a residential program. I do not have the numbers for that specific one, unfortunately, in front of us.
That's fine. I can dig it up.
Yeah,
So thank you.
I think that it's mentioned in the Rattle report that the Green Mountain Power Program has already reached 1% of their customers, and they're aiming to expand it.
Thank you.
Okay, right.
And I think this question is for Mr. Neal. One of the public staff's concern about the active load management program is they're saying that it's premature. They believe that it would be more appropriate to go to the collaborative. And one of the things that they pointed out that relates to something that one of your comments is that I think that you said that the value of some of these programs would both have on-peak and then off-peak benefits to the grid. And what the public staff is saying is that it's premature. It should go for more discussion to the collaborative because we don't yet have a value for non-peak benefits. Can you respond to their concern about the prematurity of, especially for off-peak or non-peak benefits?
Yes, and we tried to cover that last point in the incentive language to say there, to the extent that an active load management program has benefits for reducing peak demand, that won't be counted as a benefit for active load management. That's already covered in the basic definition for demand response, demand side management. So the idea is, what are the other incremental benefits on top of that? So that we tried to cover that to say there can't be double counting. If it's getting peak load reduction, that's great. We'll keep counting that as we historically have. So that wouldn't change. The idea here is to get Duke the experience of actively managing these different kinds of technologies in a distributed way, aggregating those, and use that experience to determine those values. I don't want to be in a situation where we're waiting a couple of years of study when this is, again, we're getting experience from around the country we can learn from as specific programs are brought forward to the commission for approval. So I think it's important to remember this, neither the definition nor this incentive language automatically greenlights anything. It's still going to be up to the utility to come up with proposals that have to be approved or denied by the commission. And then the idea is, let's learn from those on the ground, do the EM&V, figure out what those benefits are in North Carolina, and then hopefully go gangbusters and do this at a scale that will really start to make a real dent in what otherwise would be very expensive utility investments.
And last question, correct me if I'm not looking at this correctly, but by the limitation of 20 megawatts, it almost seems like it's a pilot program at this point, or akin to a pilot program where you can have the learning and the information, and then assuming that it's successful, then it can be expanded.
That's right.
Is that
That was the intention, was to say, let's create a framework for acquiring that initial capacity, learn from it, and then establish what those values are, allow the utility to earn an incentive based on those incremental values and open the door for additional capacity to be acquired. It was not meant to be a limitation. It was meant to be opening the door.
Okay, thank you.
Any other?
I think my questions would have been similar to what Commissioner Cameron has asked.
Right. Well, I just have a quick question on that. On that. So if it were put forth in a pilot project, it seems like historically the pilot projects haven't allowed for a PPI or incentive historically, but I don't think they're precluded. So in this case, it's this, if I'm understanding what it's a pilot project with not only PPI being suggested, but also a different level, a higher level than the existing. So is that, just in my understanding it, not.
To be clear, I was not saying it was a pilot.
No, I know, but this would be the difference between this and a pilot project would be if it came to us as a pilot project, the momentum would be to have it come in without an incentive, but I don't think it's precluded. I just think that's the momentum is pilot project. As far as I know, I can ask my attorney colleagues and we can get.
Again, our intention was to create a pathway to scale this up as quickly as possible. So yes, we weren't thinking in terms of pilots. So that wasn't really, the question was more of what kind of structure do we need to put in place to make it clear to the utility that there's value to them and value to the rest of us from going down this road?
If I may add to that, I think some of the other value of having it in the mechanism here is that clear incentive, not just for this individual project or program or suite of programs that get to that 20 megawatts that allows the EM&V to happen, that allows the recovery of the 30%. It's the 20 megawatts beyond that and saying, let's do these, let's learn and let's go. But there's a certain amount of cost that it takes to ramp up to such, 20 megawatts that, and unlike say a pilot program where you do the program, you're done and you want to take that back and ramp it down. This, because of the scale necessary for active load management programs to be successful across wide programs, we think, or at least I think, don't want to speak for David, of course, or Mr. Neal, but that the clear incentive, the runway that this provides the utility is part of what is needed in order to actually achieve these benefits, and then to allow these benefits to be achieved through time as well, as opposed to approve it kind of one-off sort of instance, but rather this is, these are the benefits that we have now defined them, and now let's keep realizing them through time past that as well.
Well, thank you for that. Any other?
Yes, in terms of 20 megawatts, that I viewed as being a cap. Is that the way it is? So you're not proposing as a cap, that's just a critical mass that would need to be established.
Yeah. That was the intention.
That was the intent.
Was to say, once you get to that threshold, we'll do the EM&V, we'll sort of figure out what these additional values are, we'll quantify it. But it was not intended to be a cap.
Not
If
intended
that was
to be a
in our fault, on our part, if it came across that way.
Yeah, and if I may, just some of the idea was that you need to have that scale in order for the EM&V to be effective to really even to capture those benefits. So that's maybe a little larger than what you would think.
Well, that clarifies that ambiguity. Thank you.
Mr. Neal, I guess you referred to around the country. I see here that only 7 states have been highlighted in the Bridle report. Why hasn't there been more participation? I would think some of the folks that I know, including me, do not want to be controlled by a power company. And is that the obstinate part about trying to promote this? I mean, I know people have got smart thermostats in their homes that don't use them, don't understand them, don't want to be bothered by them, want on off and set the temperature, those kind of things. What's your take on that, since you've studied these other programs around the country? And I get the megawatts and the increase in battery storage just in the Bridle report, all that's fine with me, but I'm just asking about that part of it. It's hard for Duke to do something that customers don't want as they've established today. Thank you.
I think the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see what kind of incentives they can offer, what kind of values, which will be based on what kind of values we see being achieved. I think I totally hear you. And it's, I'll take an EV as an example. Like when that charges doesn't really matter to most people. When the hot water heater's running, doesn't really matter. As long as there's hot water when I want to take a shower, it doesn't matter to me when it's running or not running. So I think the key to getting customer acceptance will be making sure that these programs are run in a way that don't inconvenience people, but still provide those benefits.
Yeah, if I may, I think the incentive is it's inconvenience to the people's daily lives paired with the economic incentive that it would mean for them as well.
Yeah, gentlemen, I think the consumer's making a statement about EVs as we speak.
And I think what I heard you say is before, especially like with the EVs, if the program is up and running before routines are established, this could be an option. So it would go in when the battery goes in the house before routines are established.
Yes, ideally, yes, Commissioner, definitely. It would be an opportunity to get customers used to that. And again, if it's run well, wouldn't be any inconvenience at all, but would just help the system run more efficiently. I think Mr. Huber used the word optimize. I think that's really the key here is how can we use these devices to optimize the grid?
I think we're all set then.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes.
They had so much fun up there. They're gonna come up there too.
I think my law school professors told me to avoid taking the witness stand if I could, but here we are. Good afternoon, Terrell Moore with the Attorney General's office. I thought we would just quickly walk through our position, but then take any questions you all have. We do not oppose the consensus proposal to move towards a tiered structure. In fact, we supported as much in our initial comments. Nor do we oppose any of the specific increments or percentages proposed in the consensus approach. Our sole opposition is to the inclusion of tiers for performance below 1% of prior year retail sales. While we appreciate everyone coming to a consensus, it's our position that House Bill 951 was clear that Duke is required, and this commission is required to achieve the least cost path to compliance with the authorized carbon reduction goals. Similarly, NC Gen Stat 62-133.9B requires the utilities to establish the least cost mix of demand reduction and generation measures to meet the electricity needs of its customers. And so when the companies proposed their carbon plan, they identified 1% of prior year retail sales as that least cost approach to achieving the carbon reduction goals. We don't think it's appropriate to then reward the company for achieving levels of performance below what they have identified as an achievable target. And so again, our only opposition is to including tiers of performance below that 1% threshold. So again, if you have any questions on that, we're happy to expand, but that's our key contention.
Any questions? You answered the only question we had. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We've agreed that I would go first. You probably already noticed that on behalf of Walmart, a letter was filed in the docket on April 15th. I have copies of that letter if anybody wants it. But quite frankly, we think that Walmart believes that that letter sort of accurately lays out Walmart's positions with respect to the mechanism. The comments that I have today follow up on some of the issues that were raised by commissioner questions to prior parties. But to the extent you have any questions on Walmart's position, I'm happy to answer them. Commissioner Duffley, one of the questions you asked is whether the company called any non-residential customers to participate voluntarily in demand response during Winter Storm Elliott. My client indicates that it's much harder for them to participate in that sort of demand response calls during the wintertime. Obviously, that will change as technology develops, but they have in other jurisdictions responded voluntarily to calls from a utility to address emergency situations on the grid. My recollection is they may have done that most recently in California. So there are situations where an opt-out customer will respond even if there is no incentive or payment structure for them to do so. I do not have a specific example that flows from Winter Storm Elliott. There were a number of questions about how do you address the number of C&I customers who opt out. As our comments reflect, we are hopeful that the mechanism is going to allow the company to put forward programs that are of interest. But I also think that we perceive this to be a potentially iterative process. There have been some questions about sort of the cost of the overall program. If you're offering more incentives, the overall cost gets greater. You know, one of the ways that the DSM is structured now is that when you opt in as a customer, you don't opt into that program you want to participate in. You opt into the suite of DSM programs that are applicable. And so as the commission considers the effectiveness of the DSM, it may need to look at whether a C&I customer could opt in to a program because the benefits of that program are so great to the grid. They avoid such expensive incremental investments. Right now, that's not the way the mechanism works. And in some ways, we're in a bit of a wait and see approach to see what will develop over time. Another issue that I would raise for you is that recently Kentucky Utilities and Louisville Gas and Electric, they also have a collaborative process. Unlike this process, attorneys are permitted to participate. As you're aware from the mechanism that was filed, attorneys will continue to not be participants in the collaborative process, but a compromise position was reached to allow attorneys to have greater input. One of the reasons that C&I customers wanted council participation is because, number one, particularly for groups that have multiple customers participating, it's often hard to get every single customer to participate. When you have a client who has operations in 50 states, it is sometimes hard to be present at a meeting in one state. And so one of the other issues that has come up is just the time as to how issues are allocated in the collaborative. With the Kentucky Utilities Louisville Gas example, what Walmart found is that the value in participating in the collaborative was not present because the issues were dominated by residential and low-income issues. And from just a pure, I have so many hours in the day, I have so many meetings booked, you want to have this in person or remote or whatever. If it's a 4-hour meeting and 3 hours and 45 minutes of it are residential issues, at some point, just the cost benefit wasn't present. And so in the most recently upcoming to be scheduled meeting, KU-LG&E has responded to Walmart's positions on that and will be specifically allocating periods of time within the collaborative meeting that will be dedicated. So if it's a 3-hour meeting, 9 to 10 of that is going to be on C&I issues. And it's possible that that may be something that could be adopted here to ensure that you're getting more C&I input on how to improve the program so that what comes forward to this commission are programs that are of interest to C&I customers who can presently opt out. Finally, Commissioner Hughes, I believe you were the person who raised the question of third-party aggregation. Walmart participates through the use of third-party aggregators throughout the country where it is permitted to do so. A number of jurisdictions in response to FERC Order 719A passed laws prohibiting the use of aggregators. You have probably seen in the news a number of recent instances where jurisdictions are lifting in part or in whole those bans, including Missouri, including Michigan. Most recently, the Arkansas Public Service Commission has re-energized docket 09090-U to consider whether or not to lift the ban on aggregators in Arkansas. In that docket, is a current dispute as to whether what should be lifted is the ability of the aggregator or an ARC to participate directly as a market participant in MISO and SPP, or whether that aggregator should participate through the utility. Obviously, North Carolina is different than Arkansas because there is no RTO except for the small sliver for Dominion Energy. But with respect to Duke, there is no RTO, right? So there is no need to assess this market participant issue. But what Entergy Arkansas has argued, as it has in other jurisdictions where it has service territories, is for approval of what it calls its MVDR tariff, which is essentially a demand response tariff where it works with an aggregator to aggregate customers to bid in demand response. In the Arkansas case, in comments that were filed just a couple of weeks ago, Entergy acknowledged that using and employing its MVDR tariff would improve demand response opportunities for customers in the state of Arkansas. So there are pretty good examples throughout the country of what Walmart sees as the benefit of using aggregators, even in the case where it is an aggregator that works for the utility. One of those reasons is often aggregators provide sort of it's a bit like having a portfolio of resources in your investment account, because they can bring together a lot of resources and help to avoid there being certain penalties to customers from underperformance because they bring it through in a portfolio perspective. Moreover, aggregators are experts. They literally make money by successfully bringing to the market demand response resources that perform when called upon. They do not have the competing interests of owning generation, of having to make sure their plants are running. They are literally the demand response experts. And so one of the things they can do for a utility is design really effective demand response programs that take advantage of the most up-to-date technology. They often have proprietary software, proprietary computer systems, all of which can help to improve demand response. So Commissioner Hughes, in response to your question, Walmart supports the use of aggregators in order to help facilitate demand response. It also goes a bit to what Walmart witness Steve Chris discussed at the technical conference in December, which is Walmart's operations are going to be different than the SIGFR members' operations. Walmart has valuable demand response resources to bring to bear, but it doesn't have a large industrial mechanism that it can shut off in a 15 or 60-minute period. It's going to be more incremental than that. It's going to be more subtle than that. And designing programs that take advantage of that is going to be key to unlocking a customer like Walmart choosing whether or not it would opt into demand response programs in North Carolina.
Right.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I believe I'm next. Marcus Trathan here for CUCA. I promise my remarks will be quite brief. The Executive Director of CUCA, Kevin Martin, is also here. Should there be any more specific questions about where members are on a particular issue, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer questions as well. CUCA is in alignment with the letters submitted by SIGFR and Walmart prior to the technical conference. As to the specific question posed for our panel, can we expect opt-outs to decrease as a result of the mechanism? We agree with Mr. Huber, or Mr. Duff, I think, who answered that question, which is we don't know. Certainly, we're hopeful. We agree entirely with the spirit of several of the questions and comments from the commissioners today that it seems like low-hanging fruit. I have to say that the commission directed Duke to investigate these programs in rather explicit language in its December 2022 order. And it's surprising to me that we're sitting here in April of 2024 saying, well, we'll talk about what these programs might look like. Our members are a diverse group. Some of them have load which is capable of responding to benefits and signals. Others, not so much, but there may be other things that could be done behind the meter to make it attractive to shed load and response to particular events. But we've got to have those conversations, and they're very individual, granular conversations about the needs of a particular customer and a particular industry. And we stand ready to assist with that, those conversations. There are other things that may be required to bring this to bear. Like there may need to be tariff revisions. So as it stands now, there's standby tariff charges, which are punitive. We may need to take a look at that if the use of the standby generator is to assist with demand side management. There's also requirements to participate in DICEs for momentary parallel generation, which can be a huge impediment to use of these types of behind the meter solutions. The point is there's a good bit of work that needs to be done in this space, and we need to start the conversations at least about what's possible and how to get from here to there. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Christina Kress here for SIGFR. At the outset, I want to stress that we are appreciative of the constructive engagement that has happened among the parties, resulting in the largely consensus-based filing before you. A lot of progress has been made as a result of everyone's hard work, excuse me. As SIGFR laid out in its letter filed in these dockets on April 15th, 2024, which I also have copies of to the extent anyone should need them. It is our understanding that the mechanism changes are a necessary first step before demand response programs can be designed, developed, and implemented that hopefully will be attractive to non-residential customers. But as we sit here today, I am not able to make any assurances or speak with any specificity regarding the degree to which participation by non-residential customers will change, if at all, as an indirect result of the mechanism changes currently before the Commission. As soon as the new mechanism is approved, SIGFR looks forward to getting to work with Duke and other parties to expand Duke's suite of non-residential program offerings. And we are happy to answer any questions the Commission might have. I would like to echo most of what each of my colleagues here today have already said, and I won't take the Commission's time by repeating those remarks, but happy to answer any questions and would direct the Commission to SIGFR's letter, which it pre-filed, which we believe summarizes our positions as well as the context and the background fairly thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. So this could go to two on the right, but I'll start with Mr. Trathan. You mentioned that a portion of your members could be responsive with the proper economic incentive. And some could not. What is that percentage, just roughly?
I couldn't tell you. I
Okay.
couldn't tell you. It's member by member. And even for some of those that do have the capability of responding to signals, they will differ in, for example, how much notice they need. You know, so if you're shutting down an operation, you can't just do it on a dime. If it's an extensive operation, there's safety issues and, equipment issues and all those sorts of things. So even with respect to those that are in the category of, yes, we can respond to these signals and we'd like to, there are differences in how they go about it.
Okay, and I'm just trying to get the feasibility of this. So is it, just generally, could it be, it's never going to be over 50%? It's really, we're talking 10% of the population. We're talking a range of 20 to 60%. Is there, you can't give me anything?
I can't. And Kevin, do you have any percentage you want to offer? I don't have any percentage like that, but it's, it's an issue that keeps coming to us, so it's meaningful. I know it's something that members would like to find a way to participate in.
Okay, and then obviously, I'm just repeating back to you what I heard, that if the DICES and standby issues are addressed, that percentage of participation could increase, but you're not clear what the percentage would be.
I don't. We've got live examples of members who have tried creative behind the meter approaches and have been stymied for one reason or another. The DICES is a huge gating factor, as well as the standby charges. We've got a member who has waste heat that he's been trying to use behind the meter now for over a year, and it's not been successful in working with Duke. So there's a variety of things that our members are actively working on. And when you think about it, if you're spending, $20 million on an electric bill, you're highly incentive to do whatever you can to reduce that. So there's a DSM element, but there's also just a rate element. And so our folks are laser focused on that. We're looking for all alternatives, and they're willing to spend their own money in order to take advantage of these sorts of creative things that you might be able to do behind the meter, but it might require some flexibility with respect to existing approaches that don't currently exist.
The other thing I would follow up on, just in looking at other jurisdictions, from Mr. Trathan's example, is he probably does currently have members who say, I can't possibly do it. But with the right incentive and the right structure, you probably could unlock customers who presently say that they cannot because of whatever the programmatic structure is. I'm aware that there's it's called Entergy Optional Interruptible Service. And essentially the way that the mechanism works is Walmart has been able to use those incentives to invest in backup generation. And so then it has been able to put those in new stores and then make it so that new stores can then participate in the program and go offline. And so in some ways, like, that store could not previously until the program helped facilitate it. And so I have seen examples where demand response has increased because the nature of the program facilitated it. But I also think that as members are undertaking all sorts of new different types of technology, that current options that we're not aware of are going to develop as well for these large customers on a scale that you won't see for a residential customer.
Okay, thank you. Same question to you, Ms. Kress, that I asked Mr. Trathan. Those two questions.
With respect to the percentage question, I also don't think I could answer. I can tell you there are multiple SIGFR member companies who are very interested in demand response programs and have been instrumental in collaborating with Duke and sharing that feedback for years now, going back to 2021, at least with respect to my involvement with SIGFR. And some of those recommendations are set forth in SIGFR's letter, but with respect to a percentage, I really can't say with any specificity. I will say that, to Ms. Grunman's point, there are some industrial operations, and I'm sure the same is true for some of CUCA's members, that simply cannot respond in a manner that is safe for operations, regardless of notice interval. I think that, the rigidity of those very inflexible load customers is probably more on the exception rather than the rule, in terms of, when we design a program that works for a variety of customers, that has a variety of different options, that customers can tailor and pick and choose their participation levels and in turn receive a commensurate credit or benefit, reflecting the value that they're providing to the grid. I think you will see folks who have not previously been interested in participating in such programs starting to consider whether the economics may make sense now.
Okay, thank you. To Ms. Grunman, what I heard you say is not to have a separate meeting between non-residential and residential customers, but allocate a specific piece of that time, that joint meeting, to non-residential issues. So you don't have to sit through a 5-hour meeting. You can just come for an hour. Is that correct?
That's how Kentucky Utilities, Louisville Gas and Electric is going to do it, in part because, the example that was applicable there is the Attorney General's office is particularly involved in those. And the Attorney General is going to be equally invested in programs that are C&I versus residential. And so you can get the right people on the phone if they know the block of time that you're going to devote to their issues and not get waylaid by others. Depending on the scope, because Kentucky does not have a carbon-free legislation that they're trying to meet. It is not looking at demand response in the same way that North Carolina will. They may ultimately decide to have a separate track because that's just how much time and attention and scale it needs. But certainly as a first step, devoting specific time within the collaborative to those issues would be a helpful way to try to find the time on people's schedules to be involved and be present.
Okay, and last question. You mentioned the MVDR program and talked about bidding in. You're not, obviously we're not in a market, but you were just saying that they have the experience and can develop proper programs in this jurisdiction. Is that correct?
So it's Entergy's program. They've called it MVDR,
Mhm.
and that program will have an ARC helping to bring customers to participate in that program.
Mhm.
And that is essentially in those territories where there is an RTO, it is Entergy's compromise position to giving the ARCs direct market access.
Oh, okay. So they don't have direct market
Correct.
access.
The resources get bid into the RTO by Entergy,
Mhm.
but it still brings to bear the knowledge base, the experience.
The aggregation knowledge base. Yeah. Okay.
And so that model is more appropriate here where an ARC would never have the market to go bid those resources to.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Mr. Keller.
And good afternoon, Ms. Kress. I have a question for you that I'll probably read something in your April 15th letter, and it relates to what SIGVR's current position is about the power share program that in docket, I think it's E-7 sub 1032. And SIGVR had initially said that it did not support the proposed changes to the power share program. And from my reading of your letter, and I'll tell you why I'm thinking this, but I think that my interpretation is that perhaps SIGVR's position now is that it no longer objects to the power share program, because I noted that on page 4, you mentioned what Duke stated in its block paragraph, that once the DSM EE mechanism review is complete, the company will revisit SIGVR 3's recommendation to determine whether a tiered program structure would achieve cost effectiveness under the updated DSM EE mechanism. And then in the later paragraph, you stated that SIGVR stresses that its support or abstention, depending upon the issue, to the proposed modifications in the mechanisms is provided in large part because the companies have indicated that the modifications and expansions to the demand response suite of non-residential programs that SIGVR has been seeking for over 3 years at this point are not possible without first obtaining changes to the mechanism. So, so my reading of your letter and that information is that that SIGVR may no longer be objecting to Duke's changes. Am I interpreting that correctly?
My apologies if the letter was not a model of clarity. There are, in SIGVR's mind, 2 separate issues here. One is the mechanism changes that are currently before the commission. The other is with respect to the program-specific changes proposed by the companies late last year in one of the same dockets for the power share program. SIGVR has specific recommendations for how to improve that program to further drive up participation by currently opted out non-residential customers. SIGVR would support those proposed power share modifications if the remainder of SIGVR's feedback, namely that a tiered structure of credits and a variety of different options within the program was also incorporated. SIGVR was trying to point out that in Duke's reply comments to those initial comments about the power share modifications, that the companies indicated that they are willing to at least revisit SIGVR's feedback and its suggestions about incorporating that tiering structure into the program. So we are hopeful that by supporting these mechanism changes, we are facilitating an environment in which the companies can be responsive to SIGFIR's feedback and propose power share modifications that incorporate that specific program level feedback.
Okay. And so just to be clear for the record, SIGFIR is not withdrawing its objections to the current changes that Duke is proposing to the power share program. In docket E7 sub 1032, is that correct?
SIGFIR would still like to see those additional revisions proposed, and with those additional revisions would support the totality of modifications that DEC is proposing to the power share program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Folks, again, I'm new. So am I to ascertain the fact that out of the 4,400 customers we are talking about, industrial and commercial customers, that except for 160 of them that responded during Winter Storm Elliott to take 360 megawatts off grid, you represent the additional 3,340 customers left available in the state. Is that correct?
I would not go any further than to say I represent whatever Walmart stores and operations are located within the state of North Carolina is on the grid.
Okay, so are you saying that Walmart, let me think. I read, what does Walmart do in California when they had 241 outages last year? Do they voluntarily participate, or they have backup generation?
I don't have the details specifically.
Oh, okay. I didn't know, you know, you're forthright in your position in North Carolina, but out there where they have outages, which we're all concerned about not having at Duke, you know, that's what we're about.
The question from Commissioner Doffley had to do with whether Duke ever picks up the phone and asks people to curtail.
Right, I heard that.
But in other instances that Walmart has received that type of phone call and has taken steps to respond.
Okay.
So there, while not specific to Duke or North Carolina, there have been instances where the phone call comes in, says things are really bad. We're trying to avoid an outage. Can you help? And we have done that.
Okay, so what do? They dim the lights, cut back on the heat and HVAC. What do they do about shutting down refrigeration? I'm just trying to understand in my mind, you're saying they're voluntarily, and I'm glad to hear what you guys are saying, because you heard me talking to Duke earlier. I'm glad to hear there's a small opening there, but you know, I don't know what they do, but I hope Duke will take note of this, and anytime we get close and on a demand side, they'll call every store, Walmart store, since you're voluntarily willing to jump in there and do that.
Well, let me be completely clear with you, Commissioner Tucker. My client runs a business. And so part of the reason we're here today is to make very clear that we have resources that are valuable as the company is making this transition.
Thank you.
So I am by no means committing to you that every single time there's an outage, every Walmart store in North Carolina is in a position to each and every time curtail. That would be an unfair request, I think. What I think I'm telling you is that there is room to develop a program to compensate customers like Walmart and others. But there have also been exceptions where, when called upon, Walmart has responded, as a good corporate citizen would do, just as other people get told. I think we from Duke.
Well, ma'am, I appreciate what you're saying, but you're not, you know, I was excited that all the Walmart stores, since you were talking the word, when you were speaking about voluntary, that Duke could call all the Walmart, Dominion could call all the Walmart stores, and they would voluntarily curtail in North Carolina to prevent having an outage like you do in California, in which they don't have a choice. And we certainly at this state don't want to get to that point where we have to do that for Walmart or any industrial customer. You know, I worked very hard in the legislature to make North Carolina the #1 business state in the country. And we want to be business friendly. And business friendly means competitive rates. And we also mean that our industrial customers and our commercial customers, with the gigawatts of power that's being demanded for Duke, for this state, that you guys get on board, where it's voluntary or whatever, But let me move on. I'm not arguing the point. Ms. Kress, you mentioned that your customers would be more open, certainly as you and Ms. Grumman have alluded to, not everybody's going to jump in. And I agree with that as well, because I ran a business for 20 years. I signed the front of a check. I know what an expensive power bill is, Mr. Tratham, to a small business. I understand that. You're talking about, I think you mentioned $20 million power bill. You'd want to cut that back as much as you could. You mentioned commiserate deal, commiserate incentive. What does that look like to me? Maybe giving Duke an idea, giving other people an idea as to what would be favorable to business. Obviously, you want to make a decision, and I would too, running a business that'd be as favorable to me as I could with an incentive. I mean, businesses have received PPI from the feds. Businesses have received, COVID credits, the retention credits that, from the federal government. Yeah, those things are all very helpful. What does that mean? What does that look like, Ms. Kress?
Great question. Thank you. So it means having a value differential baked into the bill credits provided for customers who do choose to opt in and participate in these
Okay.
demand response programs. For example, one lever that could be tweaked is having different notice intervals. What do I mean by notice interval? I mean the amount of time it takes for an event to be called and then the customer to in turn respond by shedding the amount of load that has been called. There would be value to the grid, SIGFR contends, for those customers who are able to safely respond and operationally respond in, say, 15 minutes, rather than a customer who can still provide value if they are responding with a day ahead notice, for example. But the credit that customer who's responding in 15 minutes versus the customer who's responding in 24 hours should look a lot different, because it's a much greater undertaking for that customer who has responded in 15 minutes than the one who has a day ahead notice.
Right.
To be able to do what is necessary operationally, to shed that
Yeah,
load.
I've in my career worked in plants and we couldn't shut down in 24 hours. 24-hour notice. It just simply, the process could not be shut down that quickly. But, I'm just looking, like you said, value. We're talking about, I hope we're talking the same language here, because I'm a business guy. We're talking about money, incentive monies to compensate those customers for making that 15-minute decision or making that 24-hour decision is helpful. Now, if I remember correctly, Winter Storm Elliott, that day, the weather dropped like 17 degrees in one day, and some of your customers cannot get off. I get all that, but I'm hearing you guys saying there's a crack and there's a door open if Duke will respond, and if they can come up with some sort of program that makes business sense to all of your customers, then perhaps we can go from 160 customers that responded and took off 369 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts and have 400 people responded. That would be great. Plus all the Walmart stores voluntarily jumping in. I had to say that, Ms. Grun. Yeah, we got to laugh. It's so boring sometimes. But I mean, that's what I like to hear, but you guys are going to have to come to the party, because where I sit, I look at everything at a 50,000 foot level. These folks have been here for a few years and go into great detail and are very familiar with all the acronyms and everything there. But when I look at it from a business standpoint, we've got a chasm between now and when we got to be decarbonized. And in between them, we've got to provide reliable power. And part of the equation can be answered by some of your very customers if the program's tailored and it's feasible for them and it makes good business sense, that you guys will come on board and help us out. It's disappointing that you would not say no. You talked about other things, but Sigrid's not on board with this now. The answer I heard is no. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that correct?
SIGFR would like to see additional program modifications made.
Is that a no? Because they asked me as a politician, yes or no. Is that a no? As it presently is, you are in a position of no. Is that correct?
As the program stands today,
Yes.
it is
That's
not
all I'm
attractive to
That's all I'm asking.
encourage non-residential customers who are currently opted out to
I understand.
participate.
So the answer is no. Third time now, I mean, the answer is no. And believe me, I was committee chairs in the legislature, so I can drill it down if you want me to. But I just want Duke to hear that there is some ability to be able to work with you folks and to call on your customers and to learn their business and what their needs are and be able to offer them something down the road and not take 4 years. I think, Mr. Trathan, as you said, was it 2020? You talked about this in 2020 and now we're in 2024 and no program yet. So I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to circle back in and understand where you are because I don't know who your customer base is other than Walmart. And I like Sam, and Sam Walton was a great guy, but he was a bird hunter like me. Thank you all for answering my questions and humoring me for being new. Thank you.
Okay, to everyone, including the court reporter, I've heard that there's one short question left. So I guess you face, but so Commissioner McKissick, you get the last word.
The thing I'm curious about, I mean, I've heard the objections to the way the stakeholder collaborative processes work. I've also heard that example given before about the notice provisions when it comes to DSM and commercial industrial, users. I guess the thing I'm trying to understand is where is the roadblock that has taken place that has stopped the type of innovation and ideas coming forth that could help really break this stalemate on behalf of commercial and industrial clients? I mean, I'm not quite getting why there has not been proposals put on the table. I mean, I understand today you're talking about, the tiered system being a part of the program, but I mean, what is it that's resulted in kind of a stalemate when it comes to this issue? Because it is an important issue and it is a significant issue, and we need more demand side management practices being adopted by commercial industrial users. I mean, so where is the fundamental problem in terms of the breakdown as it stands today? Because I've heard some of this same conversation previously.
Thank you, Commissioner McKissick, for a great question. I'll take the first stab and then defer to my colleagues. I think the stalemate has been that the current mechanism does not provide incentive levels that in turn allow Duke to offer programs that are attractive to non-residential customers. And so our understanding is that this mechanism, and it needs to be revised in order to enable the companies to allow to offer a suite of demand response programs that are attractive to non-residential customers and that make business sense. As Commissioner Tucker alluded earlier, the math has to math, in other words. And up to the present, there are unfortunately a large number of opt-outs because the math has not math. Our hope is that these mechanism changes, once approved by the Commission, will enable Duke to in turn tailor programs that are attractive enough to non-residential customers to encourage greater participation. Also, to Commissioner Tucker's point, there will always be some non-residential customers who cannot, under any circumstances, participate in a demand response program like we are contemplating here today. But our hope is that we can increase participation by those opted out customers if Duke is willing to incorporate feedback and be responsive to their large non-residential customer needs. And what we have been told is that Duke is willing, and the first step to having those conversations and implementing those changes is through these mechanism changes. So that is why we are here today, to indicate our support for this consensus proposal.
To put just a slightly finer point on it, one of the things the mechanism will do is it levels the playing field of the incentive between CapEx investment and demand side management reductions. And in many respects, an investor-owned utility is incentivized to invest money that earns a return. Demand side management is the exact opposite of that. It's how can we use less energy? So you need to build less. And in part, what the mechanism does is it says, we are going to incentivize you through the shared savings to say these are equally as important, if not more so, in the current context of House Bill 951.
So I take it that it's your hope collectively that at some point there will be continued dialogue and you'll get to where you need to be in terms of addressing the appropriate incentives and structure to entice those that are commercial industrial users to opt in, basically. Well, yeah, rather to stop them from opting out.
My understanding is that one of the reasons Duke requested expeditious approval of these mechanism changes is to facilitate changes to the programs that can be implemented before vintage year 2025. And I would appreciate someone from the company correcting me if that is an incorrect statement, but that is also why SIGFR supports expeditious review and approval of the mechanism changes.
Well, that provides some clarity, and it was my impression of that was kind of what I was reading and hearing. But I take it up to now, there's been a lack of receptiveness to proposals that have been put on the table. Or have there not been proposals put on the table at all?
SIGFR has put proposals on the table for a couple of years, and what the company's response was to its most specific to the specific feedback that it provided in the power share modification proposal is that the changes to the EE-DSM mechanism are necessary for DEC to consider incorporating this tiering structure that I have
Proposed.
very loosely discussed here and discussed with Duke on a number of occasions. But I do think your question in terms of timing, how quickly after these mechanism changes are implemented, can the programs be modified to respond to this feedback? I do think that is a question that is better posed to the companies, and SIGFR stands ready, willing, and able to work with them as quickly as the commission deems appropriate to get power share and other demand response programs before you for your review and approval.
And I guess my last question would be to the company, having this issue framed that has been proposed, what are your thoughts in terms of timing and a willingness to have this dialogue and move further conversations along with actually getting to policy? And I mean, I heard what you said earlier about rate design and all that too. Yeah.
So Commissioner, because I've got a lot to say on these topics, so I'll be brief as I can. But so we have been at every step of the way trying to get changes incorporated as soon as possible. And and originally we didn't even envision this broad of a scope for this proceeding. We wanted to limit it to just the enablers as a way to expedite this every step of the way. As it relates to large commercial customers, this is all about the economics. They're business people. We have been misvaluing these resources, so we cannot increase it. Increase and make the economics beneficial. The notion that if we just had a program that could say within 15 minutes, can you change your load, that would open up the market. We don't believe, from talking to companies out there. We don't think that is the main impediment to the market. What we see it as the economics. And Ms. Kress stated it perfectly. The first step is the mechanism to get the values. That is a broad change that influences every program. So automatically we can increase the incentive to help the economics. But saying, hey, we've got a new program, it's going to be much more onerous. You've got only 15 minutes to respond. Would you like to join? That is something that we're committed and we will explore, and we'll put that on the menu. But it was premature if already the programs don't pencil, let alone adding a new onerous component to it. So we will work with them. We are committed to improving any way that we can the collaborative process. We're constantly working with customers closely to figure out how we can make these programs better. At the end of the day, it's all economics, and the mechanism changes enable much better economics. Then from there, we'll fine-tune programs for small cohorts and sub-cohorts of customers.
If
Yes,
I
Ms.
may
Rice.
just
Yes.
respond just briefly. To be clear, SIGFR is not suggesting a program that has only a 15-minute notice period. It is proposing a range of notice intervals with 24 hours not even being the cap, potentially 48 or 72 hours, or maybe even a week ahead notice. All the way down to a potential minimum of 15 minutes to a maximum that is much larger in every variation in between. That is what SIGFR is envisioning, and we think that those different notice periods will have different values that they provide to the grid. Therefore, the bill credits should be reflective of that value differential and should be adjusted accordingly. That is SIGFR's proposal. Thank you.
And I thank you both for those clarifying remarks, and I'm cautiously optimistic that moving forward, we'll see this come together. I mean, I heard a lot of discussion about it, but I mean, actually getting to the point where there's policies ready for this commission's consideration, which reflect the consensus of the collaborative efforts of commercial, industrial, as well as Duke and the other entities and stakeholders that are involved, I think it's encouraging, and I hope we get there
Absolutely. We're ready to move fast.
sooner rather than later. Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you all very much for coming and particularly the court reporter. Thank you. It went a little longer than we thought, but great information and appreciate it. And I look forward to the next proceeding where hopefully we'll have as much hope in the room as we did today. So take care, everybody, and have a good safe trip home.
It's cautious optimism.
We're going off the record.